Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Marcus Thornfield, and what I'm about to tell you happened during my 12th year as a ranger in the Olympic National Forest. I was 34 then, had been working these woods since I got out of the Army. After Sarah died in that car accident, the forest became my home. Trees don't ask questions, they don't judge. They just stand there, solid and quiet, which was exactly what I needed. I knew every trail, every creek, every ridge in my section of the Sol Duc Valley. Could track a wounded deer through thick underbrush or find a lost hiker in fog so thick you couldn't see your own boots. The other rangers called me when they had the tough cases. Missing persons, animal attacks, the stuff that required patience and skill, not just a uniform and a radio. October 1967 was colder than usual. Snow had already dusted the higher peaks and the temperature was dropping toward 20 degrees at night. The forest felt different that month, quieter. Even the squirrels seemed nervous, chattering more than usual and staying close to their trees. I'd been a ranger long enough to trust my gut when the woods felt wrong. But monsters? That was campfire nonsense. Stories to scare tourists. I'd tracked everything from wounded bears to lost hikers, but I'd never seen anything that couldn't be explained by bad weather, poor planning, or plain old human stupidity. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Henderson family of 4 had been camping near the Sol Duc River for 3 days. They'd checked in by radio on Sunday like they were supposed to. Nothing Monday, nothing Tuesday. Their permits said they'd be back at the ranger station by now. Jake Morrison, one of the younger rangers, was supposed to go with me, but his wife was having complications with her pregnancy, so I headed out alone. 15 miles from the nearest station, through territory I knew, like my own backyard, St. Andrews Search and Rescue. I'd done it 100 times before. The trail to their campsite followed the river for most of the way. The water was running fast and cold, carrying bits of ice from the higher elevations. My boots crunched through frozen leaves, and my breath made white clouds in the air. Everything looked normal, felt normal. Just another day in the woods. But as I got closer to the Henderson campsite, something changed. The forest got quieter. Not the peaceful quiet of a winter morning, but the dead silence that comes before a storm. No bird calls, no insects. Even the river seemed to whisper instead of babble. I stopped and listened. 12 years in these woods had taught me to pay attention when nature held its breath. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what yet. The silence followed me down the trail like a shadow. Every step felt watched. Every broken branch made me look over my shoulder. By the time I reached the campsite, my hand was resting on the grip of my service pistol, though I couldn't say why. The Henderson campsite looked like a war zone. Their blue tent was shredded, long tears running from top to bottom. The cuts were too clean for bear claws, too wide for a cougar. Whatever had done this was strong enough to slice through canvas like it was tissue paper. Their gear was scattered everywhere. Sleeping bags, cooking pots, clothes, all thrown around like someone had picked up the tent and shaken it. But there was no blood, no bodies, no sign of the family at all. I knelt beside the tent and studied the damage. The tears started about 8 feet off the ground and ran downward. No animal I knew could reach that high while standing on the ground. The marks were too precise, too deliberate. This wasn't random destruction. This was something with intelligence behind it. The drag marks started at the tent and led toward the river. They were wrong too. Too wide for human shoulders. Too deep for someone being pulled along the ground. It looked like something heavy had been dragged through the dirt, something that kept the marks evenly spaced about 4 feet apart. I followed the trail, my radio crackling with static. Every few steps I tried to call back to the station. Nothing but white noise, and underneath it, something that sounded almost like howling, long, mournful calls that made my skin crawl. The tracks led to a thick stand of cedar trees about 50 yards from the river. That's where I found Amy Henderson, the youngest daughter. She was maybe 8 years old, crammed into a hollow under the roots of a massive tree. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "Amy?" I kept my voice soft, the way I'd learned to talk to frightened animals. "I'm Ranger Thornfield. Your parents sent me to find you." She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "The hungry shadow man took them," she whispered. "He walks like people but howls like the wolves. He's been watching us since we got here." I helped her out of the hollow, wrapping her in my spare jacket. She was shivering, but not from the cold. This was the shake of pure terror. "Where are your parents, Amy? Where's your brother?" "The shadow man ate Tommy while we watched." Her voice was flat, empty. "Mommy and Daddy tried to run, but he's so fast. He can jump between the trees like a bird." I'd heard trauma victims say impossible things before. Their minds played tricks to protect them from memories too horrible to process. But something in Amy's voice made me believe her. The absolute certainty. The specific details. This wasn't the rambling of a scared child. This was testimony. "We need to get you somewhere safe," I said, but Amy grabbed my arm. "He's still here," she whispered. "He's watching us right now." I looked around the forest. The trees stood silent and still. Nothing moved. But I felt it too, the weight of invisible eyes. The sense of being studied by something that understood exactly what I was, but remained, completely unknown to me. That's when I caught the smell, sweet and rotten like meat left too long in the sun, but mixed with something else, something wild and musky, like wet animal fur. The stench seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, drifting through the trees like fog. I picked up Amy and started back toward the trail. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder. The forest remained empty, but the feeling of being watched never left. Something was following us. Something that knew these woods better than I did. We were halfway back to the main trail when I saw the footprints. They started as large paw prints, maybe from a wolf or a big dog. But every few steps, they changed. The claws became longer. The pad marks spread wider. By the time we reached the trail, they looked almost human. Almost. But they were twice as long as my size 10 boots and showed claw marks that dug deep into the frozen earth. Whatever was making these tracks was bigger than any person, stronger than any animal I knew. Amy hadn't spoken since we left the cedar grove. She kept looking back over my shoulder, her small body tense with fear. "He's coming," she finally whispered. "He's hungry again." I radioed for backup as soon as we got back to the main trail. Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the static 20 minutes later. "On my way, Marcus. ETA 40 minutes. While we waited, I tried to get more information from Amy. She sat on a fallen log, my jacket wrapped around her like a blanket, and told me things that made my blood run cold. "The shadow man came to our camp on Sunday night," she said. "He stood at the edge of the light from our fire. Daddy couldn't see him, but I could. He was tall as the trees, skinny like he hadn't eaten in forever. His eyes glowed yellow like a cat's." "What did your father do?" "Daddy threw a stick at him. The shadow man laughed and went away, but he came back every night, getting closer. By Monday, he was talking to us." "Talking?" Amy nodded. "He used Grandpa's voice. Grandpa died last year, but the shadow man sounded just like him. He called to Mommy from the woods, asking her to come see him. She almost went, but Daddy stopped her." I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Whatever was in these woods, it was intelligent, patient. It had studied the Henderson family, learned their voices, their relationships. It had been hunting them like a predator stalks prey. "Tuesday morning, Tommy went to get water from the river," Amy continued. "The shadow man was waiting. He grabbed Tommy and she couldn't finish. Jake arrived just as the sun was starting to set. One look at Amy's face told him this wasn't a normal search and rescue. "What are we dealing with, Marcus?" I told him what I'd found. The shredded tent, the impossible claw marks, the tracks that changed from animal to human. Jake listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each detail. "You think it's a bear?" he asked. "Bears don't use voices," I said, "and they don't plan attacks for days." That's when we heard it. A long, mournful howl echoing through the valley. It started low, almost human, then rose to a pitch that made my teeth ache. The sound bounced off the canyon walls, multiplying until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Amy grabbed my arm. "That's him. That's the Shadow Man." The howl was answered by another from across the river, then another from upstream. We were surrounded by whatever was making that sound. But I only counted one set of tracks, one creature. So how was it calling from 3 different directions? "We need to get back to the station," Jake said, but I shook my head. "We can't leave the Hendersons out here if they're still alive." "Marcus," Jake's voice was tight. "Look at the trees." I followed his gaze to the forest around us. Long strips of bark had been torn from the trunks, starting about 8 feet off the ground and running down to shoulder height. The wood underneath was pale and fresh, like the damage had been done recently. But what kind of animal could reach that high while standing on the ground? The marks weren't random. They formed a pattern like territorial markings. Someone, or something, was claiming this part of the forest as its own. The markings stretched as far as I could see in both directions, following the river like a boundary line. We're in its territory, I realized. It's been marking the area, warning others to stay away. Another howl, closer this time. Through the trees I caught a glimpse of movement, something tall and dark, moving between the trunks with impossible speed. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, leaving only the impression of glowing eyes and reaching claws. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered. I nodded. Whatever was out there, it was huge. At least 9 feet tall, thin as a scarecrow, but moving with the fluid grace of a predator. It had been watching us, studying us, deciding whether we were worth the hunt. "Help me!" The voice came from across the river, clear and desperate. "Please, someone help me." I knew that voice. Robert Henderson, Amy's father. He was alive, calling for rescue from the other side of the water. I started toward the river, but Amy's scream stopped me cold. "Don't go! That's not Daddy! The Shadow Man is using his voice!" I listened more carefully. The voice was perfect, exactly what I'd expect from a man in trouble. But there was something wrong with the timing. The words came too evenly, like someone reciting lines from a script. And underneath the human voice, I could hear something else, a low growl that no human throat could make. "Help me!" the voice called again. "Amy, honey, come to Daddy." Amy buried her face in my jacket. "He ate them," she whispered. "He ate them all, and now he's using their voices to catch more people." The sun was almost down now, and the temperature was dropping fast. Our breath made white clouds in the air, and frost was forming on the fallen leaves. But the cold I felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was the chill of being hunted by something that understood exactly what I was, while I knew nothing about it. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." But as we started back toward the trail, I realized we were being herded. Every path that led away from the river was blocked by the stench of rotting meat. Every direction we tried to go, we caught glimpses of movement in the trees. Whatever was out there, it was driving us toward the water, toward the place where it wanted us to be. We never made it back to the trail. As full darkness fell, the creature stopped hiding. It emerged from the tree line like a nightmare made flesh, and I finally understood what Amy had been trying to tell me. It had once been human. You could see that in its basic shape, the way it moved on 2 legs, used its arms to grab and tear. But hunger had changed it into something else, something that belonged in the darkest corners of native legends and campfire stories. The thing stood at least 9 feet tall, but it was thin as a skeleton. Its skin was gray-white, stretched tight over bones that jutted out at wrong angles. Its face was the worst part. Human enough to be familiar, but twisted into something that made my eyes water to look at. Yellow fangs filled its mouth, and its eyes glowed with their own sick light. "Wendigo," I whispered. I'd heard the word from Charlie Blackhorse, a Quilot elder who sometimes guided hunting parties through the forest. He'd told me stories about cannibalistic spirits that haunted the deep woods, creatures that had once been human, but were consumed by hunger until they became something else entirely. The Wendigo tilted its head, studying us with those horrible, glowing eyes. When it spoke, it used Robert Henderson's voice again, but now I could hear the wrongness in it. The words came from a throat that wasn't built for human speech. "Amy," it called, "come to Daddy, sweet. Heart, everything's going to be okay." Amy whimpered and pressed closer to me. Jake had his pistol out, but his hand was shaking. "What do we do, Marcus?" I remembered something else Charlie had told me. Wendigos were creatures of winter and darkness, but they feared fire. In the old stories, warriors would surround themselves with flames to keep the hungry spirits away. "Fire," I said. "We need fire." The Wendigo heard me and let out a sound that was part laugh, part howl. It knew what I was thinking. It had heard the old stories, too. The creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. 1 second it was 50 feet away, the next it was leaping through the air, crossing the distance between us in a single bound. Its claws caught Jake across the chest, tearing through his jacket and shirt like they were made of paper. Jake screamed and fell backward. The Wendigo landed on top of him, its weight driving him into the frozen ground. Those yellow fangs opened wide, and I could smell the rotting meat on its breath. I emptied my pistol into the thing's back. The bullets hit with solid thuds, but the Wendigo didn't even flinch. It looked back at me over its shoulder, and I saw something like amusement in those glowing eyes. "Your turn," it said in Jake's voice, even though Jake was unconscious beneath its claws. I grabbed Amy and ran toward the river. Behind us I could hear the Wendigo's laughter, low and bubbling like water over stones. It wasn't chasing us. It was playing with us, letting us think we had a chance. At the riverbank, I fumbled for my emergency flare kit. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the cap off. The Wendigo was walking toward us now, taking its time, savoring our fear. "Tell me about the hungry shadow man," it said in Amy's voice. "Tell me how he ate Tommy." The flare sparked to life, casting red light across the way. Tur. The Wendigo stopped, its head tilted to one side. For the first time it looked uncertain. I had 3 more flares. I lit them all, throwing them in a circle around Amy and me. The red light pushed back the darkness, and the Wendigo stepped back, its eyes narrowing. "Fire," I said, just like Charlie told me. The Wendigo snarled, but it didn't come closer. It paced around our circle of light like a caged animal, testing the boundaries. Every time it got close to the flames, it jerked back as if burned. "This won't last forever," it said in my own voice. "The fire will die, and then I'll eat you slowly, the way I ate the others." Dawn was still hours away. The flares would burn for maybe 30 minutes, but I had an idea. The emergency pack in my jacket had fire-starting supplies. If I could get a real fire going, something that would burn all night. I sent Amy to gather dry pine needles while I broke branches from the dead trees along the riverbank. The Wendigo watched us work, its eyes glowing with hate and hunger. It kept trying different voices, trying to trick us into leaving the protection of the flares. "Marcus," it called in Sarah's voice. "Marcus, I'm hurt. Please help me." That almost broke me. Hearing my dead wife's voice coming from that thing's throat was like being stabbed in the chest. But I kept building the fire, kept feeding it branches and pine needles until the flames were 6 feet high. The Wendigo howled in frustration. It couldn't get close enough to attack, but it couldn't leave either. Something about our presence, our fear, kept it circling like a moth around a flame. As the first gray light of dawn appeared in the eastern sky, the Wendigo began to change. Its movements became slower, more clumsy. The glow in its eyes dimmed. Whatever power it drew from the darkness was fading with the coming sun. "I'll find you again," it promised in a voice that was its own now, rough and inhuman. "I'll follow your scent back to your station. I'll eat everyone there while you listen." But it was backing away, retreating into the deep foe, rest where the sun couldn't reach. Just before it disappeared completely, it turned and looked directly at me. "I know your smell now, Marcus Thornfield. I know your voice. Next time, you won't have fire to protect you." Then it was gone, leaving only the stench of rotting meat and the memory of those glowing eyes. The rescue team found us 6 hours later. Jake was alive, but badly hurt. 3 long gashes across his chest that would leave scars for the rest of his life. Amy was in shock, but physically unhurt. They airlifted both of them to the hospital in Seattle. We found the Henderson family's remains that afternoon. What was left of them, anyway. The Wendigo had dragged them to a cave system near the river, a place where the bones of other victims lay scattered in the darkness. Some of the bones were old, maybe decades old. Others were fresh. The official report listed it as a bear attack. That's what the newspapers printed, what the families were told. A rogue grizzly, probably sick or injured, had attacked the campsite. The bear was never found, of course. The case was closed. But I knew the truth. And I wasn't the only one. Chief Ranger Davidson called me into his office 3 days later. He closed the door and pulled a thick file from his desk drawer. "You're not the first ranger to encounter something like this," he said. "We've been tracking incidents like yours for 20 years. Different locations, different witnesses, but the same creature. Or creatures like it." The file was full of reports. Campers found partially eaten, hikers who disappeared without a trace, witnesses who described tall, thin figures with glowing eyes and impossible speed. All of them explained away as bear attacks or falls or people who simply got lost in the wilderness. "What are we dealing with?" I asked. Davidson shrugged. "Officially, nothing. Unofficially, something that's been living in these forests a lot longer than we have, something that knows how to stay hidden." I started carrying a fire kit after that. Not the standard emergency supplies, but something more extensive. Flares, waterproof matches, fire starter, dry tinder. I studied the old tribal stories, learned the traditional ways of protection. I wasn't going to be caught unprepared again. Amy Henderson spent 3 months in therapy. The doctors said she was making progress, but she still woke up screaming most nights. Her parents sent her to live with relatives in California, far from the forests of Washington. I hoped she'd be safe there. Jake recovered from his injuries, but he never came back to the Forest Service. He got a job in the city, working in an office building where the only wilderness was a few potted plants by the window. He was smart to leave. Some things, once you've seen them, you can't unsee. Winter came early that year. By November, the Solduke Valley was buried under 4 feet of snow. The hiking trails were closed, the campgrounds empty. But on quiet nights, when the wind was still, you could hear howling echoing through the valley. Long, mournful calls that made the hair on your arms stand up. I retired from the Forest Service 5 years later, moved to a small town in Oregon, far from the deep woods. But I still carry that fire kit. Still wake up sometimes, thinking I smell rotting meat and wet fur. Still listen to the news from Washington, watching for reports of missing hikers or unexplained bear attacks. Because I know it's still out there, hungry, patient, waiting for the next family to camp too far from civilization, the next lone hiker to wander off the marked trails. The Wendigo is real, and it remembers the scent of everyone who's ever escaped its hunger. If you're planning to go camping in the Pacific Northwest, take my advice. Stay on the marked trails. Don't camp alone. And always, always carry fire. You never know what might be watching from the tree line, waiting for the sun to set. My name is Robert Whitehawk, and I need to tell you about something that happened in the Huron National Forest back in 1979, something that changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I was 38 then, been working as a forest ranger for 15 years, had a wife named Sarah and a baby girl, Emma, who was just starting to walk. We lived in a small cabin about 25 miles from the nearest town, right on the edge of the Osable River District. Most folks would call it lonely, but I loved the quiet. The forest was my home. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was little. She was full-blooded Ojibwe, and she had this way of talking about the old spirits like they were real as the trees around us. She'd sit me down by the fire and tell me about the Shunka Warakin, wolf spirits that could change shape and hunt in the darkness. "They're not gone, Bobby," she'd whisper. "They're just waiting." I stopped believing those stories when I got older. Science made more sense. I learned about wildlife patterns, animal behavior, forest ecology. I could track any animal through the woods, knew every sound the forest made at night. I thought I understood everything about my world. That November was colder than usual. The first snow had already fallen, and the temperature was dropping near freezing every night. Hunting season was in full swing, so I was doing extra patrols to make sure everyone was following the rules. The forest felt different that month, though I couldn't put my finger on why. It started with Jim Kowalski's farm. Jim was a good man, ran cattle on the land that bordered the forest. He'd been having trouble with something killing his animals. Not just killing them, but tearing them apart in ways that didn't make sense. The bite marks weren't right for any predator I knew. When Sheriff Martinez called me that morning, his voice was tight. "We found Jim," he said. "You need to get out here, Robert. Something's not right." I drove my truck down the dirt road to Jim's farm, radio crackling with static the whole way. That should have been my first warning. The radio never acted up like that before. Jim's body was behind the barn, and I've seen a lot of animal attacks in my years as a ranger. This was different. His throat had been torn out, but the wound pattern was all wrong. Too precise. Too purposeful. "What do you think did this?" Martinez asked, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. I knelt down next to the body, studying the marks. "I don't know," I said, and those words felt strange in my mouth. I always knew. That was my job. The cattle were huddled in the far corner of the field, as far from the forest as they could get. They were shaking, eyes wide with fear. Even from a distance, I could smell their terror. "We need to check the tree line," I told Martinez. "Look for tracks, signs of what did this." We walked toward the forest edge, and that's when I saw them. The tracks started normal enough, 4 paws, canine shape, maybe from a large dog or small wolf. But then they changed. About 50 yards into the forest, the front paws stayed the same, but the back paws, they looked almost human, like someone walking on the balls of their feet, but with claws. I'd never seen anything like it in 15 years of tracking. "What the hell kind of animal makes tracks like that?" Martinez asked. I stood up, brushing snow off my knees. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. "They're not gone, Bobby. They're just waiting." "I don't know," I said again. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to admit existed, I was starting to remember things I'd tried to forget. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Sarah, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Emma was sleeping in her crib, and the house phenon, looked warm and safe. The real world. "Maybe it's just a sick dog," Sarah said, pouring me coffee. "You know how rabies can make animals act strange." I nodded, but I kept thinking about those tracks. About the way the cattle had been huddled together, shaking. About the static on my radio. "I need to patrol the forest tomorrow," I said. "Make sure whatever it is doesn't hurt anyone else." Sarah's hand tightened on her coffee mug. "Be careful, Robert. Something about this feels wrong." I kissed her forehead. "I'll be fine. I know these woods better than anyone." But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the wind through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching our house. Something that didn't belong in my safe scientific world. And somewhere in the darkness, I could have sworn I heard my grandmother's voice again. "They're not gone, Bobby. They're just waiting." The next morning, I met up with Tom Bradley, another ranger who'd come to help with the investigation. Tom was younger than me, maybe 28, and he still had that city boy nervousness around the deep woods. But he was good at his job and asked the right questions. "So, what are we looking for exactly?" he asked as we headed into the forest. "Whatever killed Jim Kowalski," I said, "and whatever's been attacking the cattle." We followed the strange tracks deeper into the woods. The snow made tracking easier, but something felt off about the whole forest. The normal sounds were wrong. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed quieter than usual. "The dogs in town won't come near this place," Tom said. My neighbor's German Shepherd just whimpers when he gets close to the forest road. That made my skin crawl. Dogs can sense things we can't. They know when something's dangerous. We'd been walking for about an hour when we found the first claw marks. They were carved deep into an old oak tree, about 8 feet off the ground. Long, deep gouges that looked like they'd been made by something with claws as long as my fingers. Jesus, Tom whispered. Mas, what could reach that high? I touched the marks. They were fresh, maybe a day old. And they weren't random. They formed a pattern, like some kind of territorial marking. Bears? Tom suggested, but his voice didn't sound convinced. Wrong time of year, I said. They should be getting ready to den up for winter. We kept following the tracks, and they led us to a clearing where something had been digging. The ground was torn up, and there was a smell I couldn't identify. Not quite animal, not quite human. Something in between that made my stomach turn. That's when we heard it. The howl started low, almost like a wolf, but then it changed. It got higher, more human, like someone screaming, but trying to sound like an animal. It echoed through the trees, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Tom grabbed my arm. What the hell was that? I'd heard wolves howl 1,000 times. This wasn't a wolf. We need to keep moving, I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. But the howling had done something to the forest. The silence that followed was complete. No wind, no rustling leaves, nothing. Like the whole world was holding its breath. We followed the tracks to a creek bank, and that's where things got really strange. The tracks went to the water's edge, then disappeared. But on the other side of the creek, maybe 20 feet away, they picked up again. Not like something had waded across, like it had jumped the whole distance. That's impossible, Tom said. Nothing can jump that far. I was starting to think a lot of impossible things were happening in my forest. We crossed the creek on a fallen log and kept following the trail. The tracks were changing as we walked. Sometimes they looked like a large dog, sometimes like a wolf, sometimes like those weird human-animal prints I'd seen before. Like whatever was making them couldn't decide what shape it wanted. Ted to be. That's when we saw it. Through the trees, maybe 100 yards away, something was moving. At first, I thought it was a person. It was running upright on 2 legs. But it was too tall, too fast. And as we watched, it dropped down to all 4s without missing a step, running like a wolf, but bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. Did you see that? Tom whispered. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. The thing, whatever it was, disappeared into the thick trees, but we could hear it moving, circling around us. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, getting closer. We need to get back to the truck, I said. We started walking faster, but the sounds kept following us. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes on both sides at once. Like there was more than one of them, or like it was moving faster than anything should be able to move. Tom's radio crackled with static. Base, this is Bradley. We've got a situation in Sector 7. Nothing but static came back. Base, do you copy? Still nothing. My radio was dead too, just like at Jim's farm. The sun was starting to set and the forest was getting darker. That's when we heard the voice. Help me, it called from somewhere ahead of us. Please help me. It sounded like a woman, scared and hurt. But there was something wrong with it. Something that made every instinct I had scream danger. Tom started toward the voice. Someone's in trouble. I grabbed his arm. No. Something's wrong. Help me, the voice called again. I'm lost. Please. But this time the voice came from behind us. The exact same voice, the exact same words. Like a recording being played back. Tom's face went white. That's not human. We ran. The thing followed us, crashing through the forest like a freight train. I could hear it breathing, heavy and wet, getting closer. Once, I looked back and saw eyes reflecting in the darkness. Yellow eyes, too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal. We made it to the truck just as full darkness fell. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, while Tom kept looking back at the teachar. Line. There, he said. Do you see it? I looked where he was pointing. At the edge of the forest, something tall and dark was standing between two trees, watching us. It was the wrong shape to be human, but it was standing upright like a person, and those yellow eyes were staring right at us. I got the engine started and we drove away as fast as the dirt road would let us. In the rearview mirror, I could see the thing following us to the edge of the forest, but it didn't come out onto the road. What was that? Tom asked. I thought about my grandmother's stories, about the old spirits that could change shape and hunt in the darkness. I don't know, I said, but I was starting to think I did know, and that scared me more than anything else. The attacks started happening every few days after that, always at night, always near the forest edge. Farmer Peterson lost half his chickens. The Williams family's dog disappeared, and they found blood and feathers scattered across their yard. Each time, there were those strange tracks, sometimes animal, sometimes almost human, always impossible to follow for very long. I started carrying my rifle on every patrol. Tom did too. We both knew we were dealing with something that regular ranger training hadn't prepared us for. The State Wildlife Department wants to send a team, Tom told me one morning. They think it might be a bear with rabies. I almost laughed. A bear doesn't make tracks like that, and bears don't mimic human voices. You want to tell them that? They wouldn't believe us. And that was the problem. How do you file a report about something that changes shape? How do you explain tracks that morph from animal to human? How do you tell your supervisor that something in the forest is hunting people and it's not any animal in the textbooks? I decided to do some research. I drove to the library in town and asked about local Native American stories. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, pulled out some old books about Ojibwe legends. Are you looking for anything specific? She asked. Stories about unusual animals, things that might hunt people. She gave me a strange look, but she found what I was looking for. The Shunka Warakin, wolf spirits that could change between animal and human form. According to the stories, they were created when a human committed terrible acts and was cursed to live as a beast. But they weren't quite animal and weren't quite human. They were something in between, something hungry and angry and wrong. The stories said they were strongest during the new moon, when the darkness was complete. They said they could run faster than any normal animal, jump impossible distances, and they were smart enough to use tools and set traps. They could mimic human voices to lure people away from safety. Most importantly, the stories said they were drawn to people who had forgotten the old ways, people who had turned their backs on the traditional knowledge, people like me. I was reading about protection rituals when my radio crackled to life. Tom's voice, tight with fear. Robert, get out here now. Highway 23, mile marker 15. We've got another body. I drove to the scene with my heart pounding. This time, it was a hunter named Dave Morris. He'd been camping alone near the forest, and something had torn his tent apart. The body was... I still have nightmares about what I saw. But it was the tracks around the campsite that made my blood run cold. They started as wolf prints, but as they circled the tent, they gradually changed. First, the back paws became more human-like, then the front paws. By the time they reached the tent, they were the footprints of a large man with claws. It's learning, I told Tom. Getting more human. What's learning? I couldn't explain it without sounding crazy. But I was starting to understand that my grandmother's stories weren't just legends. They were warnings. That night, I sat Sarah down and told her everything. About the Tra, Uhaks, about the thing we'd seen in the forest, about the voices that mimicked human speech. I expected her to think I was losing my mind. Instead, she nodded. Your grandmother called this morning, she said. She wanted to know if you were having dreams about wolves. I stared at her. Dreams? She said you would be. She said the old spirits were stirring, and they'd come for you because you'd forgotten how to protect yourself. I hadn't told anyone about the dreams, but for the past week I'd been waking up in cold sweats, remembering yellow eyes and the sound of bones cracking and reshaping. Dreams where something was hunting me through the forest, getting closer every night. "She wants you to come see her," Sarah said. "She says she has something that belonged to your great-grandfather." I didn't want to go. I'd spent years trying to be a modern man, a scientist, someone who dealt with facts instead of superstitions. But Dave Morris was dead, and whatever killed him was still out there, and it was getting bolder. The next morning, I drove to my grandmother's house on the reservation. She was waiting for me on the porch, a small leather bag in her hands. "You're in danger, Bobby," she said without any greeting. "The Shunka Warakan has picked up your scent." "Grandmother, You don't believe." She held up the bag. "Your great-grandfather knew how to deal with these spirits. He was a medicine man, a protector. This is sage, blessed and prepared the old way. And this..." She pulled out a small silver medallion. "This has been in our family for generations. It will hurt the spirit, but only if you believe in its power." I took the items, feeling foolish. "What am I supposed to do with these?" "When it comes for you, and it will come for you, you burn the sage. The smoke will confuse it, make it harder for the spirit to hold its shape. And the silver..." She pressed the medallion into my palm. "The silver will cut its connection to the spirit world. But Bobby, you have to believe. If you don't believe, they're just objects." I drove home with the sage and medallion, still not sure what to think. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard something outside, scratching at the walls of our house. I grabbed my rifle and went to the window. In the moonlight, I could see claw marks being carved into the side of our cabin, fresh, deep gouges, just like the ones on the trees. But I couldn't see what was making them. Then I heard Emma crying in her crib, and Sarah's scream from the bedroom. I ran to the bedroom and found Sarah standing in the corner, pointing at the window. Something was looking in, a face that was almost human, but wrong. The eyes were yellow, and the mouth was full of teeth that belonged on a wolf. As I watched, the face changed. The features shifted, became more human, then more animal, then something in between. It was like watching clay being molded by invisible hands. I raised my rifle, and the thing smiled. Then it dropped away from the window and disappeared into the darkness. "Pack a bag," I told Sarah. "Take Emma and go to your sisters in town. Don't come back until I call you." "Robert, what's happening?" I looked at the scratches on our window, at the tracks in the dirt outside. "Something's hunting us," I said, "and I think it's just getting started." Sarah and Emma left the next morning, and I was alone in the cabin with my rifle, my radio, and the leather bag my grandmother had given me. I'd called in sick to work. How do you explain to your supervisor that you need time off to fight a shape-shifting wolf spirit? Tom came by around noon. "You look like hell," he said. "Didn't sleep much. It was outside the house last night." He sat down at my kitchen table, and I could see the exhaustion in his face, too. "Robert, I think we need to call in the state police. Maybe the FBI. This thing has killed 3 people. "And tell them what? That we're being hunted by a werewolf? Then what do we do?" I showed him the sage and the silver medallion. "My grandmother says these will work." Tom stared at the objects like they were from another planet. "You're talking about fighting this thing with herbs and jewelry? You got a better idea?" He didn't answer. We spent the afternoon preparing. I had Tom help me spread salt around the cabin, another thing my grandmother had told me to do. We checked and rechecked our rifles, made sure the radio was working. I kept the sage and medallion in my pocket, feeling like a fraud but not knowing what else to do. As the sun started to set, the forest became completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just dead quiet, like the world was waiting for something to happen. That's when we heard the howling. It started far away, but it was coming closer. That same sound we'd heard before, starting like a wolf, then changing, becoming something that hurt to listen to. Tom grabbed his rifle and went to the window. "I can see it," he whispered. "At the tree line." I looked over his shoulder. The thing was standing between 2 pine trees, maybe 50 yards away. It was tall, taller than a man, and it was shaped wrong. Too much muscle, arms too long, legs that bent at strange angles. But it was standing upright, watching our cabin with those yellow eyes. "Is it human or animal?" Tom asked. "Both," I said. "Neither." As we watched, the thing began to change. Its body started to shift, bones cracking and reshaping. It dropped to all fours, but it didn't get smaller. If anything, it got bigger. The face elongated, became more wolf-like, but the intelligence in the eyes remained human. Then it started moving toward the cabin. "Shoot it," Tom said. I aimed and fired. The bullet hit the thing in the chest, and it stumbled but didn't fall. Dark blood splattered the snow, but the wound seemed to heal as we watched. "Silver," I said. "We need silver bullets." "We don't have silver bullets." The thing was at the cabin now, circling it. We could hear its claws on the walls, the scraping sound of something, trying to find a way in. Then it started talking. "Robert," it said in a voice that was almost human. "Come outside, Robert. I just want to talk." The voice was familiar. It took me a moment to realize it was using Jim Kowalski's voice. The dead farmer. "I'm lonely, Robert," it said, now using Dave Morris's voice. "Come outside and keep me company." Tom was backing away from the window. "This isn't real. This can't be real." Then the thing's voice changed again. This time, it was using Sarah's voice. "Robert, help me. It's got Emma. Please help us." I almost ran for the door. The voice was perfect, exactly like my wife's. But Sarah was safe in town with her sister. This thing was using my love for my family against me. "Robert, please," it said in Emma's baby voice. "Daddy, help me." I pulled out the sage and lit it with shaking hands. The cabin filled with aromatic smoke, and immediately the scratching sound stopped. The voices stopped too. "What did you do?" Tom asked. "Gave us a chance." The silence lasted for maybe 5 minutes. Then the thing started laughing. Not human laughter, something wet and wrong that seemed to come from all around us. "You think your grandmother's tricks will save you?" it said. And now the voice was mine. It was speaking in my own voice. "You stopped believing in the old ways, Robert. You chose science over spirit. You chose the modern world over your people's wisdom." The front door exploded inward. The thing that came through wasn't fully human or fully animal. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist. 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with hands that ended in claws and a face that kept shifting between human and wolf. Its eyes were yellow and filled with an intelligence that was both animal and human. Tom fired 3 shots into its chest. The bullet slowed it down but didn't stop it. It grabbed Tom by the thigh, wrote and lifted him off the ground. "You taste like fear," it said, and its voice was a mixture of growl and human speech. Then it bit Tom's throat out. I was alone with the thing, and it was between me and the door. The sage was still burning, but it wasn't enough to stop the creature. It was just making it harder for the thing to hold its shape. I could see it flickering between forms, sometimes more human, sometimes more wolf. "Your turn, Robert," it said. "I've been saving you for last." I pulled out the silver medallion and held it up. The thing hissed and took a step back. "Your grandmother told you about that, didn't she?" it said. "But she didn't tell you the whole truth. The silver will hurt me, but it won't kill me. Nothing can kill me. I am eternal. I am the darkness that lives in the space between human and animal." It was right. I could see the silver was causing it pain, but it wasn't backing down. It was just angry now. "But you know what really hurts, Robert?" it said, and its face became more human. "You know what really cuts deep? The fact that you're just like me now. You've killed. You've let people die. You've chosen survival over honor." I looked at Tom's body on the floor, at the thing that had killed him, at the silver medallion in my hand. "I'm nothing like you," I said. "No." The creature smiled, showing teeth that were too long and too sharp. "Then why did you let me hunt all those people? Why didn't you warn them? Why didn't you believe your grandmother's stories until it was too late?" It was right. I had doubted. I had chosen science over tradition, and people had died because of it. I made mistakes, I said, but that doesn't make me a monster. Doesn't it? The thing lunged at me. I pressed the silver medallion against its chest, and it screamed, a sound that was part wolf howl, part human agony. The smell of burning flesh filled the cabin. But it didn't stop. It grabbed me by the shoulders and lifted me off the ground. I could feel its claws cutting through my jacket, feel its breath on my face. You're going to feed me now, Robert, it said. And then you're going to become like me. The hunger will take you, and you'll hunt just like I do. I could feel myself changing, not physically, but inside. The fear was turning to anger, the anger to hate. I wanted to hurt this thing, to make it suffer like it had made Tom suffer. And that's when I understood. The creature wasn't just a monster, it was a test, a mirror that showed you what you could become if you gave in to the darkness. Instead of fighting it, I closed my eyes and thought about Sarah, about Emma, about my grandmother's stories and the wisdom I'd been too proud to accept. The creature sensed the change in me. What are you doing? Choosing, I said. I dropped the silver medallion and grabbed the burning sage instead. I pressed it against the creature's face, and this time something different happened. The smoke didn't just hurt it, it began to dissolve it. No, the creature said, and its voice was becoming less human. You don't understand. I am your darkness. I am part of you. If you destroy me, you destroy yourself. Maybe, I said, but I'd rather die as a man than live as a monster. The creature's form began to break apart, becoming smoke and shadow. Its yellow eyes were the last thing to fade. This isn't over, Robert, it whispered. There are others. There are always others. Then it was gone, and I was alone with Tom's body and the smell of sage smoke. Dawn was breaking outside, and I could hear birds singing again. The forest was alive once more. But I knew the creature had been right about one thing. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. I buried Tom in the forest, in a clearing where the morning sun would always find him. The official report said he'd been killed by a rabid wolf that was never found. Sometimes the truth is too big for paperwork. Sarah and Emma came home 3 days later. Sarah took one look at my face and knew something had changed. Is it over? She asked. For now, I said. But there are others out there. The creature told me so. I showed her the silver medallion, which now had a black burn mark where it had touched the creature's chest. My grandmother was right. Some of the old knowledge is still needed. Sarah held Emma close. What do we do now? We learn, I said. We remember. We prepare. I started visiting my grandmother more often after that. She taught me about the old ways, about protection rituals and spirit signs. She told me about other rangers across the Great Lakes region who had encountered similar creatures. We weren't alone in this fight. The spirits are restless, she said one afternoon as we sat by her fireplace. The modern world has pushed them to the edges, but they're still there, still hungry. Why me? I asked. Why did it come for me? Because you're between worlds, Bobby. You understand both the old ways and the new. That makes you dangerous to them, but it also makes you necessary. I kept working as a ranger, but now I carried more than just a rifle and a radio. I had sage, silver, and salt. I had the knowledge my grandmother had passed down, the wisdom I'd been too proud to accept before. Other rangers started calling me when they had cases that didn't make sense. Strange tracks, impossible animal behavior, attacks that defied explanation. I'd drive out to help them, bringing my grandmother's teachings and the tools she'd given me. We saved some people. We lost others. But we were fighting back. The creature had been right about one thing. There were others. Over the years, I encountered 3 more shapeshifters in different parts of the forest. Each time, the pattern was the same. They targeted people who had forgotten the old ways, who had turned their backs on traditional knowledge. But I was ready for them now. I retired from the ranger service 10 years later, but I never stopped patrolling the forest. I trained other rangers, taught them what to look for, how to protect themselves. Started a quiet network of people who understood that not everything in the woods could be explained by science. Sarah supported me, even when she didn't fully understand. Emma grew up knowing both worlds, the modern one of school and friends and television, and the older one of spirits and traditional knowledge. She learned to respect both. Now I'm 73, and the forest is still my home. I still patrol the woods, still carry sage and silver. The creatures are still out there, in the spaces between worlds, in the darkness that exists in every human heart. But they're not unopposed. My grandmother passed away 5 years ago, but before she died, she gave me her final gift, a book of stories and rituals that had been passed down for generations. The spirits are getting stronger, she said. The old barriers are weakening. Someone needs to remember how to fight them. I've been teaching Emma what I know. She's a park ranger now, working in the Upper Peninsula. She calls me sometimes with questions about strange tracks or impossible animal behavior. I give her the same advice my grandmother gave me. Believe in the old ways, but don't forget the new ones. Both are tools. Both are necessary. The Michigan shadow still haunts my dreams sometimes. I can still see those yellow eyes, still hear that voice that could mimic anyone it chose. But I'm not afraid anymore. I know what it was, and I know how to fight it. The forest is quiet tonight, but it's not empty. It's never empty. In the spaces between the trees, in the darkness that exists just outside the reach of our campfires, things are waiting. Things that remember when the world was different, when the barriers between spirit and flesh were thinner. But we remember too. We remember the old ways, the old knowledge, the old protections. And as long as we remember, as long as we teach our children to remember, we have, via chance. The spirits are patient. They can wait for generations. But so can we. And that's all I can tell you about what happened in the Huron National Forest in 1979. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. But if you ever find yourself alone in the woods, if you ever hear something howling in the darkness that doesn't sound quite right, remember what I've told you. Keep some sage in your pocket, carry something silver, and don't forget that the old stories aren't just stories, they're warnings, and they're still true. My name is Anthony Grimwald, and I spent 22 years as a ranger in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened in October of 1976. The official reports say it was a large bird, maybe an eagle or hawk. That's a lie. I was 50 years old then, still single, still married to the job. The Pine Barrens were my world. 1.1 million acres of wilderness that most people never bothered to understand. Sandy soil, cedar swamps, cranberry bogs, and pine forests that stretched for miles. I knew every fire road, every hidden trail, every spot where city folks got lost trying to find their way back to civilization. October 1976 was different from the start. We hadn't seen real rain in 6 weeks, and the forest was dry as old newspaper. Fire danger was through the roof. I spent most days checking for illegal campfires and clearing brush that could spark into an inferno. The heat was wrong for October, hitting 80 degrees when it should have been in the 60s. Even the animals seemed nervous. Deer moved in tight groups, and I found more roadkill than usual, like something was spooking them into traffic. I'd heard the Jersey Devil stories my whole life. Every local kid grew up with them. A creature born to Mother Leeds back in 1735, her 13th child that turned into a monster when she cursed it. Horse head, bat wings, clawed hands. It was supposed to live in the deep swamps, coming out to steal livestock and scare travelers. Revolutionary War propaganda, I always figured. Something to keep British soldiers out of the Pine Barrens. But that morning when I got the call about the missing family, I started thinking about those old stories differently. "We got a problem, Anthony," said Sheriff Martinez over the radio. "Family of 4 didn't check out of their campsite yesterday. The Hendersons from Philadelphia. They were due back 3 days ago." I knew the spot, a small clearing about 30 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by sand roads that twisted through the swamp. Good fishing, but isolated. The kind of place where you could yell for help and nobody would hear you. "I'll head out there now," I told him. "Probably just car trouble." But as I loaded my truck with rescue gear, I had a feeling it wouldn't be that simple. The forest felt wrong that morning. Too quiet. In all my years in the Pine Barrens, I'd never heard silence like that. No insects buzzing, no birds calling, even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. I took the old sand road that wound through the cedar swamps. My truck bounced over ruts and fallen branches, kicking up dust that hung in the still air. The deeper I went, the more twisted the trees became. Cedar and pine gave way to gnarled oaks that looked like they were reaching for something they couldn't quite grasp. The Henderson campsite was in a clearing beside a small pond. I saw their blue tent right away, but something was wrong with it. The roof was shredded, hanging in strips like someone had taken a knife to it. But there were no footprints around the tent, no sign of struggle on the ground. Just claw marks on the tent roof as if something had attacked from above. Their car was still there, keys in the ignition, cooler full of food, 4 sleeping bags laid out neat and tidy. But no people, no blood, no sign of where they'd gone. I called it in and spent the rest of the day searching. Found nothing. It was like the Hendersons had just vanished into thin air. But as the sun started to set, I noticed something else. The silence was getting deeper. Not just quiet, empty. Like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those claw marks on the tent. Roof. What kind of animal attacks from above? And why were there no tracks on the ground? I didn't know it then, but the Jersey Devil had started hunting again, and I was about to become its next target. The next morning brought more bad news. 3 farms within 10 miles of the Henderson campsite reported dead livestock. I drove out to check, hoping to find some normal explanation. Bears, maybe, or wild dogs. The first farm belonged to old Pete Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who'd been raising horses in the Pine Barrens for 30 years. I found him standing in his pasture, staring at something on the ground. "Never seen anything like it," he said when I walked up. "Found her this morning." It was a mare, a beautiful chestnut that I'd seen Pete ride around town. She was lying on her side, but there was no blood on the ground, no bite marks, just 4 small puncture wounds on her neck, like someone had driven nails into her. "Looks like she was drained," Pete said. "Blood's all gone, but the body's still warm." I knelt down and examined the wounds. They were too precise for a wild animal, too clean, and they were on the top of the neck, not the sides where a predator would naturally bite. "You hear anything last night?" I asked. Pete shook his head. "That's the strange part. Usually the horses make noise when something's wrong, but last night, nothing. Like they were too scared to make a sound." I spent the day checking the other farms. Same story everywhere. Dead animals, drained of blood with puncture wounds on the neck. But no tracks, no signs of struggle, and that same unnatural silence. By evening, I was starting to think we had a problem bigger than a few dead animals. I was driving back to town when I saw it. A shadow passed over my truck. Big shadow, too big to be a bird. I pulled over and got out, looking up at the sky. It was getting dark, but I could see something moving between the clouds. Something with wings. That's when I heard the sound. It started as a whistle, high and thin. Then it dropped lower, becoming a moan. Then lower still, until it was a growl that seemed to come from the ground itself. The sound made my teeth ache and my skin crawl. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the trees. Nothing. But I could feel something watching me. Something big and hungry and patient. I got back in my truck and drove home as fast as I could. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about the stories my grandmother used to tell, about the Jersey Devil stalking through the Pine Barrens, looking for prey, about the screams that echoed through the swamps on moonless nights. I'd always thought they were just stories, but now I was starting to wonder if my grandmother had been trying to warn me. The next morning, I found scratch marks on my truck, 4 deep gouges in the metal, like something with claws had been testing its strength. The marks were on the roof of the cab, 8 feet off the ground. I called the state police and asked for backup. They sent Officer Ray Kowalski, Pete's son, a good kid who'd grown up in the Pine Barrens like me. People are scared, Ray told me when he arrived. Mrs. Patterson says she saw something flying over her house last night. Something big, with wings like a bat. And the Miller family found their dog dead this morning. Same wounds as the horses. We spent the day searching the area around the Henderson campsite. The deeper we went into the swamp, the stranger things got. Trees with bark stripped off in perfect circles. Branches broken off at exactly the same height, like something had been marking territory. And then we found the smell. It was sulfur mixed with something else. Something organic and rotten, like burned feathers and old meat. The smell was strongest near a cluster of dead cedar trees, their branches twisted into shapes that looked almost lit, cymbals. "What do you think did this?" Ray asked. I didn't want to tell him what I was thinking, that the Jersey Devil stories might be more than just stories, that something was hunting in the Pine Barrens, and it was getting bolder. Instead, I said, "Let's get out of here. It's getting dark." But as we walked back to our vehicles, I heard that sound again, the whistle that became a moan, that became a growl. And this time, it was closer, much closer. The attacks got worse over the next few days. More livestock died. More families reported seeing winged shapes in the night sky. And the Jersey Devil started getting personal. I was checking a fire break near the swamp when I saw it for the first time. Really saw it, not just a shadow or a glimpse. It was perched on a dead tree about 50 yards away, watching me. At first I thought it was a person. It had a human shape, more or less. But then I saw the wings. Leathery, bat-like wings that stretched 12 feet from tip to tip. The head was wrong, too. Elongated, like a horse's head, but with teeth. Lots of teeth. It made that sound again, the whistle-moan growl that made my bones ache. Then it spread its wings and took off, flying silently through the trees. I radioed Ray immediately. "I need you to meet me at the old fire tower, and bring your gun." "What's wrong?" he asked. "Just bring your gun." Ray arrived 20 minutes later, his service weapon drawn. "What happened?" I told him about the creature, about the wings and the teeth and the way it moved through the air without making a sound. Ray listened without interrupting, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Anthony," he said carefully, "you've been working a lot of overtime lately. Maybe you should take a break." That's when we heard the screaming. It came from the direction of the swamp, high and shrill and full of terror. Human screaming. Someone was in trouble. We ran toward the sound, crashing through underbrush and splashing through shallow water. The screaming stopped abruptly, leaving only that unnatural silence. We found them in a smaa, all clearing beside a stagnant pond. The Miller family, husband, wife, and 2 kids. They were arranged in a perfect circle, all facing inward. All drained of blood through puncture wounds in their necks. But they weren't the Henderson family we'd been looking for. These were new victims. "Jesus Christ," Ray whispered. "What did this?" I was about to answer when I heard the sound of wings above us. We looked up and saw it circling overhead, just above the treetops. The Jersey Devil. It was huge, much bigger than I'd thought, and it was looking down at us with eyes that glowed red in the fading light. Ray raised his gun and fired 3 shots. The bullets seemed to pass right through the creature without effect. It let out that horrible sound again, then dove toward us. We ran, through the swamp, through the underbrush, through water that grabbed at our boots and branches that tore at our clothes. Behind us I could hear the creature following, its wings beating silently through the air. We made it to our vehicles and drove back to town without speaking. But I knew we were both thinking the same thing. The Jersey Devil wasn't just a story anymore. It was real, and it was hunting. That night, I went to the library and looked up everything I could find about Jersey Devil sightings. The stories went back centuries, but they all described the same creature, horse-headed, bat-winged, with claws and teeth and an appetite for blood. But the stories also mentioned something else. The Jersey Devil had territory. It stayed in the deep swamps, in the places where the old cedar trees grew thick and the water ran black. And it didn't just kill randomly. It hunted in patterns, establishing territory and eliminating threats, which meant Ray and I had become threats. The next morning, I found more scratch marks on my truck. This time they were on the windows, like the creature had bent, and trying to get inside. And there was something else. A dead crow on my doorstep, arranged with its wings spread wide. A warning. I called Ray and told him to meet me at the police station. We needed to make a plan. But when I arrived, Ray wasn't there. His wife said he'd left for work an hour ago, heading out to check on some of the farms. I drove to the Kowalski farm first. No sign of Ray. Then the Patterson place. Nothing. I was starting to panic when I remembered the old hunting cabin near the swamp. Ray had mentioned checking it for vagrants. I found his police cruiser parked outside the cabin, doors open, radio still crackling. But no Ray. Just more of those puncture wounds, this time in the car's roof, and hanging from a tree nearby, Ray's service weapon. Empty. I knew then that the Jersey Devil wasn't just hunting livestock anymore. It was hunting people, and it was getting smarter, more strategic. It had taken Ray because he was armed, because he was a threat, which meant I was next. As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard that sound again, the whistle, moan, growl echoing through the trees. But this time it was coming from multiple directions. The creature was circling, hunting, preparing to strike. I ran for my truck, but I was too late. The Jersey Devil dropped from the sky like a stone, landing on the hood with a crash that shattered the windshield. Up close, it was even more terrifying. The horse head was real, complete with a mane and large, intelligent eyes. But the mouth was full of shark teeth and the breath smelled like sulfur and decay. It reached through the broken windshield with claws like knife blades trying to get at me. I threw the truck in reverse and floored it. The creature held on for a few seconds, then spread its wings and took off, circling overhead. I drove as fast as I could toward town, but the creature followed, sometimes flying alongside the truck, sometimes diving down to rake its claws across the roof. It was playing with me, I realized, like a cat with a mouse. But I had one advantage. I knew the Pine Barrens better than anyone. And I knew where I could find help. I drove straight to St. Mary's Church in town, the oldest building in the area. Father Mackenzie was there tending his small garden behind the church. "Anthony," he said when he saw me stumble out of my damaged truck. "What happened?" "The Jersey Devil," I said, and I told him everything. About the missing family, the dead livestock, the creature I'd seen, about Ray disappearing, and the Miller family arranged in that horrible circle. Father Mackenzie listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I've been waiting for this day," he said. "My predecessor left me some old records, accounts of similar attacks going back to 1735. The creature appears every 40 years or so when the population gets too close to its territory. What does it want?" I asked. "To feed, to reproduce, to establish dominance." He looked up at the sky where dark clouds were gathering. "The old accounts say it's strongest at night, in the swamps. But it has weaknesses, too." "What kind of weaknesses?" Father Mackenzie led me into the church to a small room filled with old books and artifacts. He pulled out a leather-bound journal and flipped through the pages. "Iron," he said. "The creature can't stand iron. It burns them. And religious symbols have power, too, if you truly believe." He handed me a small iron cross, old and tarnished. This was blessed by the first priest to encounter the creature. It's been passed down through the generations. I took the cross and felt its weight in my palm. Will this stop it? It might slow it down. But Anthony, you have to understand, this creature isn't just some wild animal. It's intelligent. It learns, it remembers, and it holds grudges. As if summoned by his words, that horrible sound echoed through the town. The whistle, moan, growl that made windows rattle and dogs howl, the Jersey Devil had found me. "Stay here," I told Father Mackenzie. "Keep the doors locked." I went back outside and saw it circling overhead, wings spread wide against the darkening sky. It was bigger than before somehow. More solid, more real. It landed in the middle of Main Street about 50 yards away. Up close, in the light from the street lamps, I could see details I'd missed before. The horse head was covered in coarse hair, with a mane that moved in a wind I couldn't feel. The body was roughly human-shaped, but covered in dark scales. The wings were definitely bat-like, with a membrane that looked like old leather. But it was the eyes that got me. They were intelligent, human almost. Like it was thinking, planning, enjoying the hunt. It took a step toward me, then another. The claws on its feet clicked against the asphalt. I gripped the iron cross tighter and stood my ground. "Come on then," I said. "Let's finish this." The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then it opened its mouth and let out that horrible sound again. But this time it was louder, stronger. The windows of nearby buildings shattered. Car alarms went off, and I felt something in my chest, like my heart was trying to stop. The Jersey Devil spread its wings and launched itself into the air. It circled once, twice, then dove straight at me. I raised the iron cross just as it reached me. The creature shrieked and veered away, smoke rising from where the cross had touched its skin. It landed hard, rolling across the street, then got back to its feet and hissed at me. "Iron burns, doesn't it?" I said. "Good to know." The creature studied me for a moment, then did something I didn't expect. It smiled. A horrible, toothy grin that showed me exactly what it thought of my small victory. Then it took off again, but this time it didn't dive. It grabbed me with its claws, lifting me off the ground. I was flying, held in the grip of a monster, watching the town shrink below me. We flew toward the swamp, toward the deep places where the old trees grew and the water ran black. The creature's claws dug into my shoulders, but I held tight to the iron cross. It was my only weapon, my only hope. The Jersey Devil dropped me in a clearing I'd never seen before. Ancient cedar trees surrounded us, their branches forming a natural cathedral, and in the center of the clearing, arranged in neat rows, were bones. Human bones. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. This was its feeding ground, its lair, and I was about to become the newest addition to its collection. The creature landed beside me, folding its wings. It was in no hurry now. We were in its territory, its place of power. It could take its time. But I still had the iron cross. And I had one other advantage. I was angry. Angry about Ray, about the Miller family, about all the innocent people this thing had killed over the centuries. "You want to feed?" I said, struggling to my feet. "Then come and get me." The Jersey Devil charged. I waited until the last second, then dove to the side, slashing at its wing with the iron cross. The creature screamed and stumbled, smoke rising from the wound. We fought among the bones of its victims, the creature using its claws and teeth, me using the iron cross and my knowledge of its weaknesses. The battle lasted hours, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to stretch and compress in that horrible place. Finally, as dawn approached, the creature began to weaken. Its movements became slower, clumsier. The iron cross had burned it badly in several places, and it was having trouble flying. I managed to get close enough to press the cross against its chest. The creature shrieked and fell backward, smoke pouring from the wound. It tried to get up, but the iron had done its work. The Jersey Devil was hurt, maybe dying. But as the sun rose through the trees, I saw something in its eyes. Not defeat, not fear, just patience. It had been hurt before, over the centuries. It would heal. It would ember. And someday, it would come back. The creature crawled into the deeper swamp, disappearing among the dead trees. I stumbled back toward town, following the sun, using the iron cross as a walking stick. I found the remains of the Henderson family in the creature's lair, along with Ray and the Millers and dozens of others. The state police listed them all as victims of a large predatory bird, probably a displaced eagle or hawk. The official reports make no mention of the Jersey Devil, no mention of the territorial markings, the drained blood, the supernatural speed and intelligence. Just a wild animal that had to be relocated. But I know the truth, and so do a few others. I retired from the Forest Service 3 months later and moved to Florida. I couldn't stay in the Pine Barrens, not after what I'd seen, but I kept the Iron Cross, and I kept watching the news from New Jersey. The attack stopped after our fight. The Jersey Devil retreated to the deep swamps, back to the places where humans don't go. But it's still there, still healing, still waiting. Every few years I get a call from someone in the Pine Barrens, a new ranger, usually, or a state trooper. They've found something strange in the swamps. Dead animals drained of blood, trees stripped of bark in perfect circles, and they want to know if I've ever seen anything like it. I tell them it's probably just a large bird, maybe an eagle or a hawk, but I also tell them to be careful, to stay out of the deep swamps after dark, and to carry iron if they can, because the Jersey Devil isn't just a story. It's real, it's patient, and it's still hunting. The Pine Barrens are quiet now, quieter than they've been in decades. But it's not the quiet of peace, it's the quiet of something sleeping, something dreaming of blood and wings and the taste of fear. And someday, when the population gets too close to its territory again, it will wake up. I still have nightmares about that night in the clearing, about the creature's eyes and its horrible sound and the way it smiled when it realized I was trapped. But mostly I dream about the bones, all those bones arranged in neat rows like a garden of death. The Jersey Devil has been feeding for centuries, and it's not done yet. If you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens after dark, remember my story. Stay on the main roads. Don't go into the deep swamps. And if you hear a whistle that becomes a moan, that becomes a growl, run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back. Because the Jersey Devil is still out there, still hunting, still waiting for the next person brave enough or foolish enough to enter its domain. And next time, it might not be satisfied with just a few missing campers. Next time, it might decide to come to town. My name is William Ashworth, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. I've seen things in the forest that would make most people run home and lock their doors. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in the summer of 1971 in the Ouachita National Forest. I was 36 then, married to Sarah with 3 kids who thought their dad was some kind of hero for protecting the woods. I'd been working the Fuq district for 5 years, and before that, I spent 6 years in the Army. Military training teaches you to deal with facts, not stories. When people told me about the Fuq monster, I'd just smile and nod. Every forest has its legends, right? The Ouachita Forest covers parts of Arkansas and Oklahoma, but my section was deep in the Arkansas swampland near Boggy Creek. It's not like the mountains up north. This place is all thick mud, standing water, and trees so close together you can barely squeeze between them. In summer, the humidity hits you like a wet blanket. You sweat through your clothes in 10 minutes and the air is so thick you feel like you're breathing soup. That July was worse than usual. We'd had 3 weeks of thunderstorms and the creek was running high. The old logging roads were underwater, which meant I had to patrol by boat most days. I didn't mind. I'd grown up on these waters, knew every bend and shallow spot. What bothered me was how quiet everything had gotten. See, a healthy swamp is never quiet. You've got birds calling, frogs croaking, insects buzzing, fish jumping. But for the past week, it felt like someone had turned down the volume on the whole world. Even the alligators seemed to have disappeared, and that's not normal. Gators don't just leave their territory. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Jim Crawford, when I radioed in that Tuesday morning. Animals acting strange, I told him. Haven't seen hide-ness or hair of anything bigger than a squirrel in days. Probably the storms, he said. They'll come back when the weather settles. But I knew better. Animals don't run from storms. They hide until they pass. This felt different. This felt like they were running from something else. I was loading my boat that morning when Mrs. Henderson from the general store drove up in her old pickup truck. She was wringing her hands, which wasn't like her. Mary Henderson was tough as nails, had lived in Fuq her whole life. "Billy," she said, she'd called me Billy since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, "I need you to check on the Wilkins boys. They went fishing 3 days ago and haven't come back." The Wilkins brothers, Danny and Pete, were good men. Danny was married with a baby on the way, and Pete was set to start college in the fall. They knew these waters as well as I did, maybe better. They wouldn't just disappear. "Where were they headed?" I asked. Up toward Devil's Elbow, where Boggy Creek makes that sharp turn. You know the spot, where old man Garrett used to have his fishing camp before it got torn down. I knew it well. The fishing was good there, but it was also 18 miles from town by water, and the road was completely washed out. If something had happened to their boat, they'd be stuck. I'll head out there now, I told her. Probably just got caught by the high water. But as I pushed my boat into the muddy creek, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The water was moving wrong somehow, like it was afraid of something upstream. And that smell, I caught just a whiff of it on the wind. Sulfur, thick and rotten, like eggs left in the sun. I told myself it was just the swamp. Boggy Creek got its name for a reason. But as I started the engine and headed upstream, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The first mile was normal enough. I asked the old cypress where great blue herons nested, though I didn't see any birds. I navigated around the fallen oak that had been blocking the channel since last spring. Everything looked the same as always, but felt completely different. It was when I reached the second bend that I saw the first sign of trouble. A red baseball cap floating in the water, caught on a snag. I recognized it. Danny Wilkins wore that cap everywhere. I fished it out with my net. The fabric was torn, like something with claws had grabbed it right off his head. The cold feeling in my stomach got worse. I found their boat 20 minutes later, and it wasn't what I expected. The aluminum hull was twisted like a tin can, sitting half submerged in the shallows near Devil's Elbow. But this wasn't storm damage. I'd seen what wind and water could do to a boat. This looked like something had grabbed the sides and crushed them with incredible force. Their fishing gear was scattered everywhere. Tackle boxes split open, rods snapped in half, a cooler that had been ripped apart so violently the metal hinges were bent. But what really made my blood run cold were the marks in the mud along the bank. Handprints. That's what they looked like at first glance. But these prints were 14 inches long, with thick fingers that ended in what looked like claws. The depth told me whatever made them was heavy, real heavy. I knelt down and measured one with my hand. My fingers barely reached the second knuckle. Jesus, I whispered. I'd seen bear tracks before, but this was different. Bears don't have fingers, and the spacing was all wrong, like something had been walking upright on 2 legs, not 4. I radioed Jim Crawford. I found the Wilkins boat, I told him. It's destroyed, and I need backup out here. Destroyed how? I looked at the twisted metal again. I'm not sure. Maybe they hit something in the storm. But Jim, I'm seeing tracks here that don't make sense. What kind of tracks? Big ones, real big. And they're not from any animal I know. There was silence on the radio for a long moment. Then Jim said, I'll send Deputy Murphy out to meet you. Stay put until he gets there. While I waited, I followed the tracks up the bank. They led straight to old man Garrett's abandoned fishing camp, or what was left of it. The cabin had been demolished, but not by weather. The walls were torn apart from the outside, with claw marks gouged deep into the wood. The roof had been ripped off and thrown into the creek. Inside, I found more evidence of the brothers. Pete's wallet was lying on the floor, and Danny's keys were hanging from a nail on the wall. But no blood, no bodies. Just destruction and that sulfur smell getting stronger. The tracks led away from the cabin toward the deeper swamp, where the water was too deep for my boat. I was studying them when I heard Deputy Murphy's outboard motor approaching. Tom Murphy was a good man, steady and calm, but when he saw the boat wreckage, his face went pale. Holy hell, Billy, what happened here? I was hoping you could tell me, I said. You ever seen anything like this? Tom walked around the destroyed boat, shaking his head. Could be a bear, I suppose. Big one. Maybe got territorial when the boys got too close to a den. You see any bears lately, Tom? Can't say that I have. But with all this flooding, maybe one got pushed down from higher ground. I wanted to believe him, but I kept thinking about those handprints. What about the Wilkins boys? Probably got scared and ran into the swamp. We'll find them. We spent the next 2 hours searching the area, calling their names. The only answer was our own echoes bouncing off the trees. But just as we were about to give up, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder. But thunder doesn't last for 30 seconds straight, and it doesn't seem to move through the trees. This sound was alive, angry, and it was cold. Ming from deeper in the swamp. Tom had his hand on his gun. What the hell was that? I don't know, I said, but I think we need to get out of here. We were loading our boats when I saw them, the eyes. Two red points of light in the darkness between the trees, about 8 feet off the ground. They watched us for maybe 10 seconds, then blinked out. Tom, I said quietly, don't move fast, but look toward that big cypress about 50 yards out. Tom turned his head slowly. I don't see anything. The eyes were gone, but I could feel something still watching us. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from this place. Let's go, I said. On the ride back, Tom tried to make sense of what we'd seen. Could have been a bear, he said again. They get aggressive when they're hungry. Bears don't have red eyes, Tom. Reflection from the water, maybe, or fireflies. I didn't argue with him, but I knew what I'd seen. Those eyes weren't reflecting anything. They were glowing from the inside, like coals in a fire. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red points of light staring at me. Around midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Sarah found me there, staring out the window toward the tree line. What's wrong? She asked. A couple of local boys went missing, found their boat all torn up. Animal attack? Maybe. I didn't want to worry her with the details. I'm sure they'll turn up. But I wasn't sure of anything anymore. As I stood there looking out at the dark forest, I caught a whiff of that sulfur smell again. Faint, but unmistakable. And for just a moment, I thought I saw two red lights moving between the trees behind our house. The next morning, I was back on the water before dawn. I couldn't stop thinking about those red eyes, and I had to know what was out there. This time, I came prepared. Rifle, extra ammunition, flares, and a radio that worked better than the old one. I wasn't alone. Tom Murphy met me at the boat launch, along with Jim Crawford and a game warden named Dave Richards. None of them had slept much either. Any word on the Wilkins boys? I asked. Jim shook his head. Their mama's beside herself. State police are sending a search team, but with all this flooding, it'll be slow going. We split up to cover more ground. Tom and Dave went upstream toward the logging camps while Jim and I headed back to Devil's Elbow. The morning was still and humid with fog hanging low over the water. Everything felt wrong, like the swamp itself was holding its breath. We'd been on the water for maybe 30 minutes when Jim grabbed my arm. Billy, look at that. He was pointing at a stand of cypress trees about 100 yards ahead. At first I didn't see anything unusual. Then I noticed the pattern. 5 or 6 trees had been broken off about 8 feet from the ground, not cut, broken. And they weren't scattered randomly. They formed a rough circle like something had walked around, snapping them off one by one. Storm damage? Jim asked, but he didn't sound convinced. We beached the boat and walked over to examine the trees. The breaks were clean, as if something with incredible strength had simply grabbed each trunk and twisted until it snapped. The broken tops were lying in the center of the circle, arranged in a neat pile. Animals don't do this, I said. No, Jim agreed. They don't. That's when we heard the first call. It started low, like a foghorn, then rose to a shriek that seemed to go on forever. The sound was coming from 3 different directions, like whatever was making it had friends. Jim had his rifle ready. What do you think? I think we need to call for backup. But when I tried the radio, all I got was static. The fog was getting thicker, and I was starting to feel like we were being herded towards something. Let's get back to the boat, I said. We made it maybe 50 yards when we found the first body. Pete Wilkins was hanging upside down from a cypress branch about 15 feet off the ground. His body was twisted at impossible angles, and his face was gone. Just gone. Like something had bitten it clean off. Jim threw up in the bushes. I wanted to, but I forced myself to look closer. Pete's clothes were shredded, and there were claw marks all over his chest and arms. But the worst part was his hands. They were clutching something. I couldn't see what without climbing up there, and I wasn't about to do that. Jesus Christ, Billy, what did this? I don't know, but we need to get out of here now. We ran back toward the boat, but it wasn't there anymore. The rope I'd tied to a cypress root was cut clean through, and the boat was floating about 20 yards offshore. Too far to swim to, especially with something in the water. That's when I saw the second body. Danny Wilkins was floating face down near the far bank, his arms spread wide. Even from a distance, I could see the massive wounds on his back. "The radio," Jim said, pulling out his handheld. "I'm calling for help." But before he could key the mic, something erupted from the water between us and the boat. It was huge, covered in dark fur, and it moved like nothing I'd ever seen. The creature stood up in the shallow water, and I got my first good look at it. 9 feet tall, maybe more. Built like a man, but covered in coarse black hair. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, and its hands ended in claws like butcher knives. But it was the face that stopped my heart. Red eyes, like I'd seen the night before, and a mouth full of yellow teeth. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't quite animal either. The thing looked right at us and let out that shriek again. Up close, it was like standing next to a freight train. Jim dropped his radio and started firing. I saw at least 3 shots hit center mass, but the creature didn't even flinch. "Run!" I yelled. We crashed through the underbrush, Jim right behind me. I could hear the thing following us, breaking through the forest like a bulldozer. It was fast, faster than anything that size should be. I led us toward higher ground, away from the water. My plan was to reach the old logging road where maybe we could flag down help. But every time we thought we'd lost it, we'd hear that shriek again, closer than before. We made it about half a mile before Jim collapsed. He was holding his side, breathing hard. "Can't," he gasped. "Go on without me." "Like hell," I said, but I could see he was done. Jim was 55 and had been riding a desk for the past 10 years. He wasn't built for this kind of running. That's when I realized the forest had gone completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just our ragged breathing and the sound of water dripping from the trees. "It's here," I whispered. The creature stepped out from behind a massive oak tree, maybe 30 feet away. This close, I could see the intelligence in those red eyes. It wasn't just a wild animal. It was thinking, planning, and it was enjoying this. It took a step toward us, then another. I raised my rifle, knowing it wouldn't do any good. The thing had taken 3 shots already without slowing down. But then something unexpected happened. The creature stopped, tilted its head, and let out a series of short barks, almost like it was talking to someone, or something. From the trees around us came answering calls, 2 more, maybe 3. We were surrounded. "Oh God," Jim whispered. "There's more than one." The first creature pointed at us with one massive claw, then gestured toward the water. The meaning was clear. It wanted us to go back to the swamp. "Billy," Jim said, "I'm not going back there." Neither was I. But as the other creatures began to show themselves, stepping out from behind trees and rising from the water, I realized we might not have a choice. The creatures herded us back toward the water like sheep. There were 4 of them now, moving through the forest with a coordination that proved they weren't just mindless beasts. They were working together, communicating with those barking calls, and they had a plan. The biggest one, the first one we'd seen, stayed behind us, while the others flanked us on both sides. Every time we tried to veer away from the water, one of them would appear in our path, forcing us back toward the swamp. "What do they want?" Jim whispered. I was starting to understand. "I think they want us to see something." We reached the water's edge at a place I'd never been before. The swamp opened up into a wide, shallow basin surrounded by massive cypress trees. In the center was a small island, maybe 50 feet across, covered with what looked like a crude shelter made from branches and mud. But it was what surrounded the island that made my blood run cold. Dozens of objects were arranged in the shallow water: boats, fishing gear, camping equipment. And bones, lots of bones, picked clean and white as ivory. Jesus, Jim breathed. How long have they been doing this? The largest creature waded into the water, moving with surprising grace for something so huge. It gestured for us to follow, those red eyes never leaving our faces. We had no choice. The other creatures were right behind us, and there was nowhere else to go. The water was warm and thick, like soup. I could feel things moving beneath the surface, fish, maybe, or snakes. But as we got closer to the island, I realized the movement was more deliberate. There were alligators down there, lots of them, but they weren't acting like wild gators. They were circling us, keeping us penned in. They're controlling them, I said. The creatures are controlling the alligators. The island was worse than I'd imagined. The shelter was made from human bones as much as branches. Skulls were arranged in neat rows, and I could see clothing and personal items scattered everywhere. This wasn't just a feeding ground, it was a trophy room. The largest creature climbed onto the island and turned to face us. It opened its mouth and let out a sound I'd never heard before. Not quite a roar, not quite a scream. It was trying to communicate. "What's it saying?" Jim asked. I listened carefully. The sound had rhythm, almost like language. And suddenly, I understood. "It's not an animal," I said. "It's intelligent. They all are." The creature nodded, as if it understood what I'd said. Then it pointed to the bones, then to us, then back to the bones. The message was clear. We were going to join this collection. But something else was happening. The other creatures were backing away, moving toward the edges of the clearing. The alligators were disappearing too, sliding away into deeper water. Even the big one on the island seemed nervous, looking around like it was expecting something. That's when I smelled it, that sulfur stench, but stronger now, much stronger. And with it came a sound like nothing I'd ever heard. Not the barking calls the creatures had been making, but something deeper, older, like the earth itself was groaning. The water began to churn. Something was rising from the depths of the swamp, something that made the 9-foot creatures look small. I caught glimpses of it through the murky water. Massive, serpentine, with eyes that glowed like green fire. The creature on the island let out a shriek of terror and dove into the water, swimming away as fast as it could. The others were already gone, crashing through the forest in their panic to escape. "What the hell is that?" Jim yelled. I didn't answer because I was too busy trying to figure out how to get us out of there. The thing in the water was getting closer, and I could see it was huge, maybe 30 feet long, with a head like an alligator but much bigger. This wasn't just another creature. This was what the other things were afraid of. The water exploded as the thing surfed, acid completely. It was like looking at a dinosaur, something that should have been extinct for millions of years. Its eyes fixed on us, and I saw an intelligence there that was ancient and utterly alien. It opened its mouth, revealing teeth like railroad spikes, and let out a bellow that shook the entire swamp. Trees 50 yards away lost their leaves from the sound alone. "Swim!" I yelled. "Swim for shore!" We dove into the water and started swimming as hard as we could. Behind us, I could hear the creature moving, water cascading off its massive body as it gave chase. Jim was a strong swimmer, but he was tiring fast. The shore seemed impossibly far away, and I could feel the thing gaining on us. Its shadow passed over us, blocking out the sun. That's when my military training kicked in. I remembered something from survival school. Predators often strike at the easiest target. I grabbed Jim's arm and pulled him down under the water, hoping the creature would lose sight of us. It worked, sort of. The thing passed overhead, its massive tail brushing against my back. But it didn't stop. It kept going, straight toward the shore, where we'd been headed. We surfaced quietly, treading water. The creature was thrashing around in the shallows, looking for us, but it was built for deep water, and it was having trouble maneuvering in the shallow swamp. "This way," I whispered to Jim, pointing toward a fallen log about 20 yards away. We swam underwater, using the log as cover. From there, we could see the creature clearly. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water, with fins that looked almost like wings. But it was also frustrated. It knew we were somewhere nearby, but it couldn't find us. After a few minutes of searching, it let out one final bellow and disappeared back into the deeper water. We waited another 10 minutes before climbing onto the log. The swamp was dead quiet again, but it felt different now. The creatures were gone, scared off by something even bigger and more dangerous. "We need to get out of here," I said. Jim nodded, but he was in bad shape. The swim had taken everything out of him, and he was shaking from more than just cold water. It took us 3 hours to make it back to civilization, following game trails and old logging roads. By the time we reached the ranger station, it was getting dark, and we were both exhausted. The official report said the Wilkins brothers died in an alligator attack. Jim and I told the truth to our supervisors, but somehow it got rewritten. Unusual animal behavior due to flooding was the final conclusion. The bodies were recovered the next day by a team of state police divers. They found Danny and Pete in that underwater trophy room, along with remains from at least 12 other people going back decades. The divers reported seeing large alligators in the area, but nothing about creatures or the massive thing we'd encountered. I tried to tell the truth to the newspapers, but nobody wanted to hear it. The story that made it into the papers was about a bear attack and the dangers of fishing alone in remote areas. The fact that there were no bears in that part of the swamp was conveniently ignored. 3 days later, I put in for a transfer to the Mountain District. I told Sarah it was for a promotion, but the truth was I couldn't go back to that swamp. Every time I got near the water, I could smell that sulfur stench, and I'd start shaking. Jim Crawford retired early, claiming heart problems. Tom Murphy moved to Texas to work for the Highway Department. Dave Richards, the game warden, took a job with the Fish and Wildlife Service in Alaska. None of us ever talked about what we'd seen, but we all knew the truth. The creatures were still out there. Over the years, I heard stories from other rangers and local folks, fishermen who'd seen red eyes in the darkness, campers who'd found their gear arranged in strange pattern, as hunters who'd heard those barking calls echoing through the forest. The town of Fuke became something of a tourist attraction after a movie was made about the monster. People came from all over the country to hunt for Bigfoot, most of them treating it like a joke. They didn't understand that the real thing wasn't a joke at all. I kept track of the missing persons reports from that area. Every few years, someone would disappear, usually hunters or fishermen who'd gone out alone. The official explanations varied: drowning, animal attacks, getting lost in the swamp. But the pattern was always the same. About 10 years after the incident, I was working a case in the Ozark Mountains when I met another ranger who'd had a similar experience. Different state, different creature, but the same official cover-up. He told me about a network of people like us, law enforcement, park rangers, military personnel, who'd encountered things that officially didn't exist. "They're not just in Arkansas," he said. "They're all over the country. Different types, different behaviors, but they're all connected somehow." He gave me a phone number and told me to call if I ever needed to talk to someone who'd understand. I've used that number 3 times over the years, and each time I learned something new about the things that live in the dark places of our world. The government knows about them, has known for decades, but they can't do anything about it without causing a panic, so they cover it up and hope the creatures stay in their remote territories. Most of the time that works, but sometimes, like in the summer of 1971, the two worlds collide, and people like me are left to deal with the consequences. I'm retired now, living in a small town in Colorado where the biggest predator is a black bear. But I still get calls sometimes from young rangers who've seen things they can't explain, from police officers who've encountered something that doesn't fit in their reports. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Document everything, trust your instincts, and never go into the deep woods alone. Because the creatures are still out there, in the swamps and forests and mountains, living in the spaces between our world and theirs. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, they come looking for us. The Fuke monster is still out there too. I know because I drive through Arkansas every few years, and I can smell that sulfur stench when I cross the bridge over Boggy Creek. The red eyes are still watching from the darkness, and the bones are still piling up on that island in the deep swamp. But now I know it's not just one creature. It's a family, maybe a whole species, that's been living in those waters for longer than humans have been in North America. And that thing I saw rise from the depths, the real monster, is something even older and more dangerous. So if you ever find yourself in the Ouachita Forest near Fouke, Arkansas, and you smell sulfur on the wind, don't go looking for the source. Turn around and walk away. Because some legends are true, and some monsters are real, and they're always hungry. My name is James Ironwood, and I've been a forest ranger for 11 years. I've seen a lot of strange things in the woods, but nothing like what happened in Blydenboro that winter. Nothing that made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It was January 1954, and North Carolina was hit by the worst cold snap in decades. Ice storms had knocked out power lines for miles around. The Croatan National Forest, where I worked, was like a frozen wasteland. Trees cracked like gunshots in the cold. Animals huddled wherever they could find shelter. I was stationed 12 miles outside Bladenboro, living in a small ranger cabin with my wife Sarah. We'd been married just 6 months, and she was still getting used to the isolation. No neighbors for miles. No phone most days when the lines froze. Just us and the endless forest. The war had taught me about monsters. Real ones. The kind that walked on 2 legs and spoke your language. After 3 years in the Pacific, I thought I'd seen the worst humanity could offer. The forest felt peaceful compared to those memories. Wild animals, even the dangerous ones, followed rules you could understand. They hunted for food, defended their territory, protected their young. Simple. Honest. That's why I became a ranger. After the chaos of war, I needed something steady. Something that made sense. I'd handled plenty of predator problems over the years. Black bears getting into garbage, wildcats taking chickens, the occasional rabid raccoon. Standard stuff. I knew how to track, how to read signs, how to predict where an animal would go. The forest was my territory, and I was good at my job. But that January, something felt different. It started with the dogs. Every farm dog in the area had gone quiet. Not just quiet, they were terrified. They'd whine and scratch at doors, desperate to get inside. When you forced them out, they'd press against the house, never venturing into the yard. Old Murphy, who ran the general store in town, mentioned it when I stopped by for supplies. "Dogs ain't been right for weeks," he said, loading canned goods into my truck. "Mine won't even go to the outhouse with me." I'd noticed it too. My own dog, Rex, a tough German Shepherd mix, had been acting strange. He'd follow me to the edge of the forest, then stop dead. His hackles would rise, and he'd back away, whining. Nothing I did could make him go further. The livestock were worse. Cows bunched together in the corners of their fields as far from the tree line as possible. Horses paced their stalls, sweating despite the cold. Even the chickens had gone quiet. No morning crowing, no scratching around the yard. Sarah noticed it too. "Something's got all the animals spooked," she said one morning, watching our neighbor's cattle through the kitchen window. "They're acting like there's a storm coming, but the sky's clear." I told her it was probably just the cold. Animals acted funny in weather like this. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen animals react to predators before. This was different. This was fear on a level I'd never seen. The first call came on a Tuesday morning. Bill Watson, who farmed about 5 miles south of us, had lost 3 goats overnight. When I got to his place, he was standing in his barnyard, face pale, hands shaking. "They're all dead, James," he said. "All 3 of them. But I ain't never seen anything like this." The goats lay in their pen, but they looked wrong. Empty. Like someone had let all the air out of them. Their skin was loose, hanging off their bones. But there was no blood, not a drop. I knelt beside the first one, examining the wounds. 2 small puncture marks on the neck, perfectly round, about an inch apart, clean, precise, like someone had used a needle. "You see any tracks, say some?" I asked. Bill shook his head. Ground's too frozen, but James, look at this. He led me to the fence surrounding the pen. Deep scratches ran down the wooden posts, 4 parallel lines, gouged into the wood. They were too high off the ground for a dog, too widely spaced for a raccoon. The spacing suggested something with paws about the size of a large cat. Mountain lion, maybe? Bill suggested, but his voice was uncertain. I studied the marks. They were deep, cut clean through the wood in some places. Whatever made them was powerful. But mountain lions hadn't been seen in these parts for decades, and they didn't drain their prey of blood. I'll file a report, I told him. Set some traps around the area. Whatever did this will probably come back. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The marks were too precise, too deliberate, and those puncture wounds, they looked almost surgical. That night, I cleaned my rifle and checked the ammunition. Sarah watched me from the kitchen table, her coffee growing cold. You think it's dangerous? She asked. I wanted to tell her no. Wanted to say it was just a wild animal, maybe sick or desperate from the cold. But the look in Bill's eyes kept coming back to me. The way those goats looked. The absolute silence of the forest. Just being careful, I said. But I loaded the gun with silver bullets. My grandfather had given them to me years ago, along with stories about things that hunted in the dark. Stories I'd never believed. Until now. The next morning brought more calls. 3 farms hit in one night, all with the same pattern. Livestock dead, completely drained of blood, no signs of struggle. The animals looked like empty skins draped over bones. I spent the day driving from farm to farm, documenting the kills. Each scene was identical. Those precise puncture wounds, the drained appearance, the claw marks on nearby posts or trees. But no tracks, no scat, no hair caught on fences. Whatever was doing this moved like a ghost. By evening, I'd counted 12 dead anima. Whilst word was spreading through the county, people were starting to talk about vampires, about evil spirits, the kind of talk that made practical men uncomfortable. I was driving home just as the sun set, my truck loaded with plaster casts of the claw marks and photographs of the wounds. The forest looked different in the dying light, darker, more alive somehow. That's when I saw it. A shape moved between the trees parallel to the road. Quick, fluid, too big to be a dog, too graceful to be a bear. It kept pace with my truck for maybe 50 yards, then vanished into the shadows. I stopped the truck and grabbed my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and snow. But the silence was absolute. No wind, no animals. Even the truck engine seemed muffled. I walked to the edge of the forest, following the beam of my light. The snow was undisturbed, but something felt wrong. The air smelled different, metallic, like old pennies. Then I heard it. A sound like a cat purring, but deeper, hungrier. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. I backed toward the truck, hand on my pistol. The purring grew louder, closer. My flashlight began to dim, the beam growing weaker with each step. The battery was brand new. I made it to the truck and slammed the door. The engine turned over on the 3rd try, and I drove home faster than I should have on those icy roads. Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, dinner getting cold on the table. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. What happened? I told her about the farms, about the dead animals. I didn't mention the shape in the trees or the sound. Not yet. Maybe it's a rabid animal, she said. Something sick. Maybe. But I knew it wasn't. Rabid animals didn't drain blood. They didn't move like shadows. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me reach for the rifle beside the bed. Around midnight, Rex started whining at the back door, then barking, then howling like I'd never heard him howl before. I got up and looked out the window. The yard was empty, but Rex was, pressed against the house, looking toward the forest. His whole body was shaking. Then I saw them. Eyes. Yellow, glowing eyes, watching from the tree line. They were too high off the ground to be a dog, too wide set to be human. As I watched, they moved, circling, hunting. I grabbed the rifle and went to the back door. Rex bolted inside the moment I opened it, hiding under the kitchen table. The eyes were gone. But carved into the oak tree beside our porch were fresh claw marks. 4 deep gouges, still bleeding sap. The next morning I found Tom Bradley dead in his barn. Tom was a good man, ran a small dairy farm about 3 miles from us. He'd been checking on his cows when it happened. I found him lying in the hay, arms spread wide, face turned toward the ceiling. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. 2 puncture wounds in his neck. His skin was loose, hanging off his bones like an empty sack. No blood anywhere. The cows were bunched in the corner of the barn, as far from Tom's body as they could get. They were silent, eyes wide with terror. I'd seen that look before, in men who'd seen too much combat. I called the state police. Detective Ray Morrison arrived within an hour, a thin man with sharp eyes and a skeptical expression. He examined the body, took photographs, asked the right questions. Animal attack, he concluded. Probably a large cat. Maybe escaped from a zoo. I showed him the claw marks, the pattern of wounds. He nodded and wrote in his notebook, but I could see he was just going through the motions. We'll send the body to Raleigh for autopsy, he said. Set up a hunting party. Whatever did this won't get far. But I knew it would. This wasn't a normal predator. This was something else. Something that hunted with intelligence and purpose. That afternoon, I drove to the county library. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She'd lived in the area her whole life and knew every story, every legend. I need to know about local folklore, I told her. Old stories, things that might explain what's happening. She led me to a back room filled with dusty books and old newspapers. What kind of things? Things that hunt, things that drain blood. Her expression grew serious. You mean the old stories? The ones the mountain people used to tell? She pulled out a journal, handwritten in faded ink. This belonged to my grandmother. She came from the mountains, brought the old ways with her. I read about creatures that were neither man nor beast, things that hunted in the dark, feeding on life itself. The journal called them wampus cats, beings that had once been human but had been cursed, transformed into something hungry and eternal. They say silver can hurt them, Mrs. Henderson said quietly, and running water. They can't cross running water. You believe this? She looked at me with eyes that had seen 8 decades of life. I believe there are things in this world that don't fit into neat categories, things that science can't explain. I thanked her and left with the journal. As I drove home, I thought about the silver bullets in my rifle, my grandfather's stories, the way the forest felt different now, dangerous. That night, I told Sarah we should leave, visit her sister in Charlotte until this was over. I'm not running from an animal, she said. This is our home. But she agreed to keep the rifle close and to never go outside alone. We were about to learn that some things you can't outrun. Some things find you no matter where you hide. The attacks escalated over the next week. Every night brought new victims, livestock, pets, and then another person, old Pete Marshall, found dead in his chicken coop. Same wounds, same drained appearance. The fear in town was thick, enough to cut with a knife. Detective Morrison organized hunting parties. 30 men with rifles and tracking dogs spread through the forest in groups of 5. They found nothing. The dogs refused to follow any scent trails, whining and backing away whenever they got close to the areas where attacks had occurred. I joined the 3rd hunt, leading a group through the section of forest behind our cabin. The men were nervous, jumping at every sound. They'd all seen the bodies, heard the stories. These were tough countrymen, but they were scared. We were deep in the woods when Marcus Webb, a logger from town, grabbed my arm. You hear that? I stopped, listening. The forest was silent except for the crunch of snow under our boots. Then I heard it, a low rumbling, like a motor running in the distance. Sounds like a truck, one of the men said. But it wasn't a truck. It was purring. The same sound I'd heard from the road, but louder now. Closer. The dogs started whining, pulling against their leashes. One of them, a bloodhound named Duke, broke free and ran back toward town. The others followed, dragging their handlers with them. "What's got into them?" Marcus asked. I knew. The same thing that had gotten into Rex, into all the animals in the county. They could sense what we couldn't. They knew we were being hunted. The purring grew louder. It seemed to come from the trees above us, then from the ground below. The men raised their rifles, but there was nothing to shoot at. Then I saw it. A shadow moving between the trees, keeping pace with our group. It was big, maybe 4 feet at the shoulder, with the fluid grace of a cat. But no cat moved like that. No cat had eyes that glowed yellow in broad daylight. "There," I whispered, pointing. The men followed my gaze, but the shadow was gone. Only the purring remained, circling us now, getting closer. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." We backed toward the trail, weapons ready. The purring followed us just out of sight. When we reached the road, it stopped, like something had drawn an invisible line it couldn't cross. That night, I sat in my kitchen, cleaning my rifle for the 10th time. Sarah was making coffee, her movements quick and nervous. We'd barely spoken since the hunt. "The men are talking about bringing in the National Guard," she said. "Won't help. This isn't something you can fight with normal weapons." She turned to face me. "What do you mean?" I told her about the shadow, about the purring, about the way the dogs had reacted. I told her about Mrs. Henderson's journal and the stories of Wampus cats. "You think it's some kind of monster?" "I think it's something we don't understand, something that doesn't follow normal rules." That's when the lights went out. The power had been unreliable all week, but this felt different, deliberate. The house was suddenly silent. No hum of the refrigerator, no tick of the electric clock, just darkness and the sound of our breathing. I grabbed the flashlight and checked the windows. Nothing moved in the yard, but the air felt charged, like before a thunderstorm. Then Rex started barking. Not the warning bark I was used to, but something desperate, terrified. I found him in the living room, pressed against the far wall, staring at the front door. His whole body was shaking. "What is it, boy?" The door creaked, just slightly, like someone was testing it. The deadbolt was locked, but the sound came again. Creak, creak, creak. Sarah moved behind me, her hand on my shoulder. "James?" I raised the rifle, finger on the trigger. The door stopped creaking. For a moment, everything was silent. Then something landed on the roof. Heavy, deliberate. It walked across the shingles, circling the house. "The attic," Sarah whispered. I nodded. If it got into the attic, it could come down anywhere. I handed her the pistol and moved toward the stairs. The footsteps on the roof followed me. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. Tiat was tracking me from above. I climbed the stairs slowly, rifle ready. The attic access was a simple panel in the hallway ceiling. I could hear scratching now, claws on wood. It was trying to get in. The scratching stopped. The house was silent again. Then the panel moved. Just an inch, but enough to show that something was pushing from above. I raised the rifle and fired. The silver bullet punched through the panel, and something screamed. Not like an animal, not like a human, something in between. Something wrong. The panel fell open, and blood, real blood, dripped onto the floor. But whatever was up there was gone. I heard it moving across the roof, away from the house. The lights came back on. The refrigerator hummed to life. Everything was normal again, except for the blood on the floor and the bullet hole in the ceiling. "Did you hit it?" Sarah asked. "Yes, but I don't think it's dead." I was right. The next morning I found tracks in the snow around the house. Not paw prints, something between a human hand and a cat's paw. The prints were filled with blood, leading from the house to the forest. I followed the trail for half a mile before it disappeared at a creek. The water was running fast, ice-free despite the cold. I remembered what Mrs. Henderson had said about running water. On the other side of the creek, I found something that made my blood run cold. A cave, hidden behind a cluster of rocks. The entrance was stained with blood, and the smell coming from inside was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Death and decay, but also something alive, something hungry. I didn't go in, not that day, but I knew I'd found its lair, and I knew it would be back. I spent the next day preparing. If this thing was what I thought it was, normal weapons wouldn't be enough. I melted down every piece of silver I could find, coins, jewelry, even Sarah's wedding ring. She insisted. I molded new bullets, blessed them with water from the creek, and loaded them into my rifle. Detective Morrison thought I'd lost my mind when I told him about the cave. You're tall. King about monsters, James. Vampires. This is 1954, not the Dark Ages. Then explain the wounds. Explain why the animals are terrified. Explain why your hunting parties haven't found anything. He couldn't. But he also couldn't accept what I was telling him. Even if you're right, what do you want me to do? Put out a bulletin for a vampire cat? Just keep the men away from the forest tonight. Give me 12 hours. He agreed, reluctantly. Maybe he was starting to believe, or maybe he just wanted to humor me. Either way, I had until dawn to end this. Sarah wanted to come with me. I'm not letting you face this alone. One of us needs to survive to tell the story. Then let's make sure we both survive. She was right. This thing was smart, and it had been hunting me specifically. Going alone would be suicide. We reached the cave just as the sun was setting. The smell was stronger now, and I could hear movement inside. Not just one creature, multiple shapes moving in the darkness. How many do you think there are? Sarah whispered. I don't know. Maybe just one. Maybe a whole pack. I tied a rope around my waist and anchored it to a tree. If something dragged me into the cave, Sarah could pull me back. She had the pistol loaded with silver bullets and instructions to run if things went wrong. The cave mouth was narrow, forcing me to crawl for the first 20 feet. The walls were covered in scratch marks, thousands of them, like tally marks, or a record of kills. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight revealed something that made my stomach turn. Bones. Human bones. Picked clean and arranged in neat piles. Some were old, yellowed with age. Others were fresh, still stained with blood. In the center of the chamber was a depression in the rock floor. It was filled with a dark liquid that reflected my flashlight beam. Blood. Gallons of it. That's when I saw them. Eyes, yellow eyes, watching from the shadows. Not one pair, not two. At least 6, arranged in a semicircle around the chamber. They were perfectly still, patient. Waiting. I raised the rifle and fired at the nearest pair. The silver bullet found its mark, and something screamed. The eyes vanished, but I could hear movement in the darkness. They were circling me. The rope around my waist jerked tight. Something had grabbed it from behind. I turned to see a shape in the tunnel entrance. Sarah, but wrong. Her eyes were yellow, her movements too fluid. She smiled, revealing long, sharp teeth. Hello, James. It wasn't Sarah. It was wearing her face, but the voice was different, older, hungrier. Where is she? Safe, for now, but hungry. So very hungry. I backed against the chamber wall, rifle raised. The creature wearing Sarah's face moved closer, and the eyes in the shadows began to glow brighter. You can't kill us all, it said. We are eternal. We are legion. We have fed on this land for centuries. What do you want? What we have always wanted. To hunt, to feed, to survive. Your kind makes it so easy. Always alone, always vulnerable. Always full of such rich, warm blood. It lunged at me then, moving faster than anything should be able to move. I fired point blank and the silver bullet tore through its chest. It screamed and fell backward, Sarah's stolen face melting away to reveal something else. Something between human and cat, with too many teeth and claws like razors. The other creatures in the chamber began to move, flowing out of the shadows like liquid death. I fired again and again, each silver bullet finding its mark. They screamed and fell, but there were too many. One of them reached me, claws raking across my chest. I felt my ribs crack, felt blood pour down my shirt. but I kept firing until the rifle was empty. The remaining creatures backed away, wounded but not dead. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Sarah's voice calling my name. Real Sarah, not the thing that had worn her face. "James, the rope!" Followed the rope back through the tunnel, the creatures snarling behind me. They were afraid of the silver, but they weren't going to let me escape. I could hear them following, their claws scratching against stone. I reached the cave entrance, and Sarah pulled me out. Behind us, the creatures gathered in the mouth of the cave, eyes glowing like lanterns, but they didn't follow us outside. They can't leave the cave, I realized. Something's keeping them there. "The water," Sarah said. "Look." The creek had changed course, flooding the area around the cave. The creatures were trapped on the other side, unable to cross the running water. But even as we watched, the water began to recede. The barrier wouldn't hold forever. "We need to seal the cave," I said. "Permanently." Sarah nodded. "How?" I looked at the rocky hillside above the cave, at the frost-cracked stones held in place by centuries of ice. "Dynamite. I've got some at the ranger station." We made it back to the truck as the creatures began testing the water barrier. They were learning, adapting. Soon they would find a way across. The dynamite was old, left over from a road project the previous summer. I packed it carefully around the cave entrance while Sarah kept watch. The creatures had found a way to cross the creek. They were flowing over the rocks like liquid, staying just above the water. "James, hurry!" I lit the fuse and ran. The explosion shook the ground, bringing down tons of rock. The cave entrance vanished under a wall of stone, and the screaming from inside was cut off. But I knew it wasn't over. Things like this didn't die easily. They were patient. They could wait. The official report blamed the deaths on a rabid wildcat. Detective Morrison supported this conclusion, despite the evidence. "People need to sleep at night," he told me. "They need to believe the world makes sense." I understood, and some truths are too dangerous to share. But I kept the silver bullets, and I kept Mrs. Henderson's journal, and I started paying attention to stories from other parts of the state. Livestock killings, mysterious disappearances, reports of strange creatures in the night. The pattern was there if you knew what to look for. These things weren't unique to Bladenboro. They were spread across the rural South, hidden in deep forests and isolated mountains, an ancient network of predators that had learned to hide from the modern world. Sarah and I moved to Charlotte 6 months later. I took a job with the State Wildlife Department, officially to study predator behavior, unofficially to track reports of unusual killings, to be ready for the next outbreak, because there would be one. There always was. The cave in Bladenboro stayed sealed for 3 years. Then the rocks began to shift, not from earthquakes or erosion, but from something pushing from inside. The Forest Service reinforced the barrier with concrete and steel, but I knew it was only temporary. Some things can't be killed. They can only be contained. I returned to Bladenboro in 1958, 4 years after the initial attacks. The town had returned to normal, mostly. People still talked about the winter of '54, but the stories had become legends. Safe stories about a rabid animal that had terrorized the county until brave hunters tracked it down. I visited the cave site. The concrete was cracked, the steel reinforcement bent outward. Deep scratches marked the barrier, and I could smell that familiar metallic scent. They were still there, still hungry, still waiting. But the water still ran strong, and the silver still worked. Some knowledge was passed down for a reason. Mrs. Henderson died in 1961, but she left me her grandmother's complete collection of journals, stories from across the region, dating back to the early 1800s, accounts of creatures that matched what I'd seen in Bladenboro, but with different names: wampus cats, vampire beasts, shadow hunters, all describing the same things. I start at a network of people like me, rangers, police officers, hunters, anyone who had encountered something that didn't fit into normal categories. We shared information, tracked patterns, and prepared for the next outbreak, because there would always be a next time. The beast of Bladenboro was contained, but not destroyed. And it wasn't alone. Across the rural South, in deep forests and isolated mountains, Other creatures waited, patient, hungry, eternal. They were part of the landscape now, woven into the fabric of the wilderness. Most people would never see them, never know they existed. But they were there, in the spaces between civilization and the wild. And sometimes, when the conditions were right, they would hunt again. I'm retired now, but I still keep the silver bullets. Still check the reports from Bladensboro. Still dream about yellow eyes watching from the darkness. Sarah asks me sometimes if I regret what happened, if I wish I'd never seen the truth about what lives in the deep woods. I tell her no. Someone has to know. Someone has to watch. Someone has to be ready. The beast of Bladensboro is still there, behind tons of rock and steel, waiting, dreaming of the hunt. And one day, it will be free again. When that day comes, I'll be ready. Because some stories never end. They just pause between chapters. My name is Daniel Ravencroft, and after 18 years working as a forest ranger in the Sierra Nevada mountains, I thought I'd seen everything. Bears that could tear a car door off its hinges, rock slides that could bury a whole campsite in seconds, lost hikers who wandered into the wilderness with nothing but a water bottle and died of cold before we could find them. But I was wrong, dead wrong. It was August 1983, and California was burning. The worst heat wave in decades had turned the mountains into a tinderbox. Every day brought new fire warnings, and every night I went to bed wondering if I'd wake up to smoke and sirens. The Sequoia National Forest was my responsibility. 20 square miles of ancient trees and granite peaks that stretched up to 8,000 feet above sea level. I'd been stationed at Pine Ridge District for 3 years, ever since my divorce. Linda said I loved those mountains more than I loved her. And maybe she was right. After Sarah walked out and took our daughter Emma with her, the forest became my home. My cabin sat 20 miles from headquarters, connected to the outside world by a crackling radio and a winding dirt road that turned to mud every winter. The isolation never bothered me. I had my job, my rope rescue training, and 200 successful rescues under my belt. When people got lost or hurt up there, I found them. When they fell off cliffs or got trapped in caves, I brought them home. It was good work that meant something. The Yokut tribe had lived in these mountains for thousands of years before people like me showed up. During my cultural training, I learned about their legends. They spoke of creatures called Mayak, ancient spirits that guarded the deep forest. The old stories said these guardians would protect the trees and punish anyone who showed disrespect to the wilderness. I always figured it was just folk. Lore. Beautiful stories, but stories all the same. On August 15th, I was cleaning my gear when the radio crackled to life. Pine Ridge, this is base. We've got a situation. My supervisor's voice was tight with worry. A research team from UC Berkeley had been studying plant life in the high country for a week. 3 graduate students and their professor, Dr. Sarah Chen, had been documenting drought effects on sequoia growth patterns. They'd checked in every day at 6 p.m. sharp until yesterday. Last contact was 36 hours ago, Base continued. Their camp was at the Pine Ridge Trail, grid coordinates 36.7468 north, 118.4234 west. Can you check it out? I grabbed my pack and headed for the truck. The Pine Ridge Trail was a 5-mile hike through some of the most beautiful country in California. Giant sequoias that had been growing since before Christ was born. Granite cliffs that caught the morning light like mirrors. It was the kind of place that made you understand why people called these mountains sacred. The drive took 40 minutes on switchback roads that clung to the mountainside like a drunk man walking a tightrope. I parked at the trailhead and shouldered my pack. The thermometer in my truck read 94 degrees, and it wasn't even noon yet. The hike to their camp should have taken 2 hours. I made it in 90 minutes. What I found didn't make sense. The research station was still there, 4 tents arranged in a perfect square around a central fire pit. But something was wrong. The camp looked like the researchers had just stepped away for a few minutes. Coffee cups sat on the picnic table, still half full. A laptop computer was open, its screensaver bouncing back and forth. Expensive scientific equipment lay scattered around like they'd been working just moments before. But there was no one there. I called out, my voice echoing off the surrounding cliffs. "Hello? UC Berkeley team, this is Ranger Ravencroft." Nothing. I walked through the camp, my boots crunching on pine needles. The tents were all zipped shut, but when I
looked inside, I found sleeping bags, clothes, and personal items. No signs of struggle. No blood. No indication they'd packed up and left. That's when I saw the first footprint. It was pressed into the dirt near the fire pit, and it was huge. 18 inches long, maybe more. 5 distinct toes, each one the size of my thumb. The print was pressed 3 inches deep into ground that was baked hard as concrete by the drought. I knelt down and put my hand next to it. My palm looked like a child's hand in comparison. No bear made tracks like that. No human either. I stood up and looked around the camp with new eyes. The silence was complete, not just quiet, but wrong. In all my years in these mountains, I'd never heard silence like this. No birds singing. No squirrels chattering. No insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. My radio crackled. "Pine Ridge, this is base. What's your status?" "I'm at the camp," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're not here. Equipment's still set up, but no sign of the team. Any indication of where they went?" I looked at the massive footprint again. "Maybe. I'm going to search the area. I'll call back in 2 hours." "Copy that. Be careful, Daniel." I followed a trail of broken branches and disturbed earth into the forest. The sequoias towered above me, their massive trunks disappearing into the canopy. Some of these trees were over 2,000 years old, older than any human civilization. Walking among them always made me feel small and temporary. But today, they made me feel watched. I'd gone maybe a quarter mile when I found the backpack. It was hanging from a branch 30 feet up in a giant sequoia, the straps wrapped around a limb that was as thick as my waist. The pack was bright red with UC Berkeley printed on the side. I stared up at it, my mind racing. How does a backpack end up 30 feet off the ground? Even if someone had thrown it, the angle was all wrong. The branch it hung from was directly above the trunk, not off to the side where you'd expect if someone had hurled it up there. I set up my climbing gear and rappelled up to get it. Inside, I found a student ID for someone named Michael Torres, along with textbooks, notebooks, and research equipment. The notebook had entries dating back a week, all written in neat handwriting. The last entry was from 2 days ago: strange behavior in local wildlife. Birds have mostly disappeared from the area. Squirrels and chipmunks seem agitated, constantly looking toward the deeper forest. Dr. Chen thinks it might be related to the drought, but I'm not so sure. There's something else happening here. Something that's making the animals afraid. I radioed base and reported what I'd found. Within an hour, a helicopter arrived with a full search team. We spent the rest of the day combing the forest and expanding circles around the camp. As the sun started to set, we found Michael Torres. He was alive, but barely conscious. We discovered him in a shallow cave about 2 miles from camp, dehydrated and in shock. His left arm was broken, and his face was covered in scratches that looked like they'd been made by claws. As we loaded him into the helicopter, he grabbed my arm with his good hand. His eyes were wild with fear. "It wasn't a bear," he whispered. "It was something else. Something huge and smart and mean. It had golden eyes that looked right through me. And it knew exactly what it was doing." The helicopter lifted off, taking Michael to the hospital in Fresno. The rest of us made camp for the night, planning to continue the search at first light. I should have insisted we all leave together. That night, I learned what real fear felt like. I was sharing a tent with Ranger Linda Torres, no relation to the student, just B.A.D. luck with names. Linda was tough as nails, a former Marine who transferred to the Forest Service after her tour in Vietnam. If anyone could handle trouble, it was her. We'd been asleep
For maybe 3 hours when the sound woke us both. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it kept going, and going. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the canyon walls and rolling through the forest like a wave. Linda sat up in her sleeping bag. What the hell was that? Before I could answer, the sound came again. Closer this time. It was definitely an animal, but like nothing I'd ever heard. Deeper than a bear's roar, more sustained than a mountain lion's scream. It was the sound of something big and angry, and very, very close. We grabbed our flashlights and unzipped the tent. The beam of my light swept across the campsite, illuminating our gear and the cold ashes of our fire. Everything looked normal. Then I pointed the light toward the tree line. 2 eyes stared back at us from the darkness. They were golden, like coins in the flashlight beam, and they were at least 8 feet off the ground. For a moment, nobody moved. The creature, whatever it was, just watched us with those impossible eyes. Then it was gone, vanishing into the forest without a sound. "Did you see that?" Linda whispered. "Yeah." My voice came out as a croak. "Yeah, I saw it." We spent the rest of the night taking turns on watch, but we didn't see the eyes again. When morning came, we found tracks all around our camp. The same massive footprints I'd discovered the day before, but dozens of them. Whatever had been watching us had circled our camp for hours. The other members of our search team arrived at sunrise. There were 6 of us now, all experienced outdoorsmen, all armed. We spread out in a line and began searching for the missing researchers. We found Dr. Chen first. She was hanging from a tree branch 40 feet above the ground, her body twisted at an impossible angle. Her neck was broken, but there were no other wounds. No blood. No signs of struggle. She just hung there like a rag doll, swaying gently in the morning breeze. It took us 2 hours to get her down. The other 2 students were found the same way, suspended from high branches, their necks snapped cleanly. Each body had been placed with what seemed like deliberate care, positioned so they faced the sunrise. "This is impossible," said Ranger Peterson, a 20-year veteran who'd seen his share of animal attacks. "No bear could do this, no mountain lion, hell, no human could do this." But the evidence was right in front of us. We radioed for backup and started photographing the scene. That's when we noticed the trees. All around us, massive sequoias and pines had been twisted and broken. Not cut down, broken. Trunks that were 3 feet thick had been snapped like twigs, their broken ends 12 feet off the ground. The damaged trees formed a rough circle around the area where we'd found the bodies. Linda pointed to a particularly large sequoia that had been uprooted entirely. "Daniel, look at this." The tree was enormous, easily 300 years old, with a trunk that would have taken 6 people holding hands to encircle. It had been pulled up by the roots and moved 20 feet from its original position. The root ball was the size of a small house. "What kind of machine could do this?" Peterson asked. "There's no machine," I said, staring at the massive tree. "No roads up here big enough for heavy equipment. No way to get anything that powerful this far into the wilderness." Linda was examining the bark on the displaced tree. "Daniel, come look at this." I walked over to where she was standing. The bark was scarred with deep gouges, each one about 6 inches long. There were 5 gouges grouped together like fingers, like claws. "Something grabbed this tree," Linda said quietly. "Something with hands big enough to get a grip on a 3-foot trunk." As we stood there trying to process what we were seeing, the forest around us began to change. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. The air became thick and heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. And that terrible silence returned. No birds, no insects, no sound except our own breathing. I felt like we were being watched. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Now." But as we turned to leave, we heard it again. That low, rumbling roar. But this time it was coming from all around us. The sound seemed to shake the very ground beneath our feet. And then we saw it. The creature stepped out from behind a massive sequoia like it had been waiting for us all along. It was 10 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that seemed to ripple in the filtered sunlight. Its shoulders were broader than a refrigerator, its arms longer than a man's entire body. But it was the eyes that stopped my heart. They were intelligent. Not animal intelligence, human intelligence. Maybe something more than human. Those golden eyes studied us with an awareness that made my skin crawl. The creature, I couldn't think of it as anything else, moved with surprising grace for something so large. It didn't lumber or crash through the underbrush. It glided between the trees like it owned them, which maybe it did. Peterson raised his rifle, but before he could fire, something happened that I still can't fully explain. A wave of pure terror washed over all of us. Not fear of the creature, fear that came from the creature. I felt it push into my mind like a physical force, flooding my thoughts with images of death and darkness. I saw the forest from the creature's perspective. I saw humans as invaders, destroyers, parasites that cut down ancient trees and poisoned sacred streams. I felt its rage at what we'd done to the wilderness, its determination to protect what little remained. And I understood why the research team had died. The creature had been watching them for days, studying their behavior. It had seen them taking samples from the sequoias, doxaus, lamenting the damage caused by drought and human interference. In its mind, they were threats to be eliminated. Peterson's rifle fell from his hands. 2 other rangers dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by the psychic assault. I fought to stay standing, fought to keep my thoughts clear. The creature stepped closer. I could smell it now, a musky animal scent mixed with something else, something that reminded me of wet earth and old leaves. It was the smell of the deep forest, of places where humans had never walked. It reached out with one massive hand and grabbed me by the throat. The fingers were as thick as my wrist, covered in coarse hair that felt like steel wool. The creature lifted me off the ground effortlessly, bringing me face to face with those golden eyes. Up close, I could see intelligence there, and something else. Sadness. This creature wasn't just a monster. It was a guardian, a protector of something precious that was being destroyed a little more each day. It had been alone in these mountains for God knows how long, watching over the ancient trees, keeping the sacred places safe, and we were the enemy. The creature's grip tightened around my throat, cutting off my air. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. In a few seconds, I would be dead, hung from a tree branch like the others. But then I remembered something from my cultural training. The Yokut legends spoke of ways to show respect to the forest guardians, specific rituals, gestures of humility and reverence. With the last of my strength, I pressed my palms together and bowed my head. It was a gesture of respect the Yokut had used for centuries, a way of acknowledging the sacred nature of the wilderness. The creature's grip loosened slightly. I closed my eyes and projected thoughts of reverence, of genuine love for the forest and everything in it. I thought about the hundreds of people I rescued over the years, the way I'd always tried to leave the wilderness better than I found it. I thought about the ancient sequoias and how they'd been growing here since before human civilization began. The creature's hand opened, and I dropped to the ground, gasping for air. When I looked up, it was backing away, but its eyes never left mine. I saw something in those golden depths, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. It recognized that I was different from the others, that I understood what this place meant. The creature turned and walked back into the forest, moving between the massive trees like a shadow. Just before it disappeared entirely, it looked back at me one last time. I knew I'd been given a warning. Stay away from the deep forest. Show respect for the ancient places, or face the consequences. The official report listed the deaths as the result of a bear attack combined with falling rocks. Nobody questioned it. Nobody wanted to question it. The photographs we'd taken mysteriously came out blurred and indistinct. The massive footprints were explained away as hoax evidence planted by pranksters. But I knew the truth. I transferred to a different district a month later. I couldn't stay at Pine Ridge, couldn't sleep in that cabin knowing what was out there in the darkness. I started studying Native American folklore, learning about the old ways of showing respect to the wilderness. The Pine Ridge Trail was permanently closed to the public. The official reason was geological instability, but I knew better. Some places are too sacred, too dangerous for people to visit. Some guardians are too powerful to ignore. I still work as a forest ranger, but I'm more careful now. I pay attention to the signs, the silence of birds, the agitation of small animals, the feeling of being watched. I know that we're not alone in the wilderness, that there are things out there older and more powerful than anything we can imagine. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder about the others. If there's one guardian in the Sierra Nevada, there might be more. Ancient. Protectors watching over old-growth forests across the country, keeping the sacred places safe from human interference. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the deep woods, I feel those golden eyes watching me, not with hostility now, but with caution. A reminder that I'm a guest in these mountains, that I'm only welcome as long as I remember my place. The beast of Pine Ridge is still out there, still watching over the ancient sequoias. And as long as people like me respect the boundaries, as long as we remember that some places are sacred, it will let us pass. But if we forget, if we start to think we own the wilderness instead of being part of it, then the guardians will remind us, and that reminder will be the last thing we ever see. Final word count, approximately 3,800 words.